Fatal Star, Mage Saga Book 7, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Chapter 24. Though Bongo's culture was pacifist, his species didn't give a shit about each other, not if money was involved. He hadn't imagined for a second Karina would be willing to spend more than half the large sum she possessed to buy her companions freedom. His omission had almost cost the mercs their lives, so it was with mixed feelings she said goodbye to him when she left Lakshmi station for a second time. As she pulled herself through the umbilicus to return to the Peregrine with the mercs, Xiao spoke to her over the comm. "He really didn't tell you until after you left our cell." "Of course he didn't. Do you think I would have let you all believe you were going to die as a joke? It's just hard to understand. I mean, he's a different species. You can't expect him to think like us." "I know, but he seemed nice." "He is nice. But remember how his cousin tried to fleece us? Money has an even higher value to them than to us. You'd think after all that time at the station he would understand humans better. You said that other people in the fight had paid their fines too, so he's seen what we do." "I asked him about that. He said that amount of money is nothing to rich Lakshmiites." Xiao whistled. "Holy smoke! I didn't realize the quantity of creds washing around that station even existed in the galaxy." Karina reached the Peregrine's airlock and hauled herself inside. Van Hasty, Rees, and the other mercs were already waiting. "You don't know the half of it. Wait till I tell you where the rich got their money." Her boots hit the deck. When Xiao arrived, Rees shut the outer hatch and activated pressurization. "Where?" the pilot asked. At the same time, Darius sent. "Karina, are you back?" "Yes, sweetheart. See you in a minute." Her HUD showed normal atmosphere. She removed her helmet. "I have to see the kids. I'll talk to you later." Said Rees. He was holding his helmet awkwardly. She paused. "Did you want to say something?" "Yeah," said Van Hasty, her head down. We're sorry about the fight," said Rees. "Yeah, we're sorry," Van Hasty echoed. "And we want to thank you for paying all that money to save us from—" She faltered. "It's not a problem." In fact, it was. With more than half their funds gone, they were now restricted on fitting out the Bathsheba with defensive weapons. The merc stunt could cost everyone their lives in the long run, and they knew that. "Well, thanks anyway," Rees said. The other black dogs nodded in agreement. Karina quickly removed her Eva suit and set off to find Darius, Nala, and Parthenia. Darius hadn't said where they were, but she guessed they would be on the bridge. It turned out she was right. Darius greeted her with a hug, and so did Nala after she'd limped over. Karina's heart ached at the reminder that the visit to Lakshmi station had been a disappointment on another level. It was hard to face the reality that her little sister would never be the same. In many ways she hadn't changed. She was still cheeky and adventurous, but she'd lost that spark of brilliance that set her apart. "Isn't it wonderful that Darius can cast?" Parthenia asked, apparently unable to keep the note of envy out of her voice. Karina knew how she felt. She was happy for their brother, yet she couldn't help feeling a little jealous too. "Yes, it is." Turning to Darius, she said, "You always surprise us with what you can do. I'm glad we still have one mage in the family." Another child his age would have taken her words at face value, but Darius felt the emotions underlying them. He smiled sadly. "I wish you could cast too. Maybe you'll be able to again one day." Parthenia put her hand to her head and squeezed her eyes shut. "Are you okay?" Karina asked. "Not completely. I've been feeling ill since we got back." "Go and lie down. Xiao will be here in a minute to fly us to the Bathsheba. One of the ship's doctors can take a look at you." "Yes, all right." It wasn't like Parthenia to agree so easily. Karina looked at her more closely. She did look pale. After the episode with the mercs, she didn't feel so great herself. "What happened at the station?" Parthenia asked, halting in the open doorway. "What took you so long?" "That's a long story, and not one for telling in front of the kids. I'll fill you in another time. But you should know we're not as rich as we were." That's a shame. I hope we can still afford some treatment for Nala." When Karina arrived at the Bathsheba, she discovered another disaster had occurred in her absence. Jackson's prosthetic arm had been severed in an accident with the lasers on the hull. "I don't believe it! I can't leave you guys alone for 2 minutes without something terrible happening. What'll it be the next time I step out of the ship? Is she going to blow up? Is someone going to fly her into the star? Or invite the Regians to a party?" "Calm down," said Bryce. "He only lost his prosthetic. It could have been a lot worse." "It is a lot worse. I haven't told you what happened on Lakshmi yet." "Yeah," said Jackson. "What went down over there? Van Hasty and Rees look like someone stole their puppy." "Before you tell us," Bryce said, "you should know the second bit of bad news. It's probably better to get it all out of the way now." Karina pressed her palms to her face. "Are you sure I need to know?" Bryce patted her shoulder. "Don't worry, no one's died." "Thank the stars for that. Things were touch and go for a while on Lakshmi. I don't think I could stand another life and death crisis." "Jace is in sickbay." Her hands dropped to her sides. "What's wrong with him?" "The docs don't know. They're still trying to figure it out. I went to see him and found him in bed. He didn't want to bother anyone. Kept saying he'd be okay after a good sleep. I called a medic to take a look at him, and she recommended sickbay right away." Shit. Parthenia was also feeling unwell. Was it related? She would have to tell her sister to get checked out. "Is that it? No other catastrophes to report?" "That's it. You can tell us what happened on Lakshmi now." "Well," said Karina, wondering where to start. Then everything went black. Chapter 25. Karina opened her eyes. She was on her back in a bed, and the air smelt faintly medicinal. Sick bay? She moved to sit up. 1,000 hammers beat on her skull, and the room lurched. Her stomach began to force its way up into her throat. Swallowing hard, she lay down. She remained motionless, recovering, though her head didn't stop hurting. The second time she tried to move, she only ventured to look to one side. Parthenia was in the neighbouring bed, her eyes closed. This time it was Karina's heart that lurched, as she feared the worst. But her sister was only asleep, breathing regularly and gently. There was a pink flush to her skin. She didn't attempt moving again. It only made the hammers beat harder. As she watched her sister, she went over what she remembered. She had been talking with Bryce and Jackson. Jackson was missing his prosthetic, and Bryce had said something about... She frowned. Jace. He had said Jace was in the sick bay. Now she and Parthenia were here too. 3 mages all sick at once? It was too much of a coincidence. Something was going on. Was someone targeting the mages? It couldn't be anything to do with Lakshmi because Jace hadn't been there, and no one on the station knew about him. It had to be the work of someone aboard the Bathsheba. Was that why they'd lost their ability to cast? Had someone discovered a substance that would take away their abilities? It seemed unlikely. As far as she knew, no one understood how or why mages could cast. So it should be impossible to know how to affect the process. Plus, their sickness had begun days after they'd lost their abilities. The two things weren't related, or only tangentially. Everyone knew what had happened to them. It was possible their enemy had only decided to make their move because they felt safer now. Not that she or anyone else would have cast to hurt them anyway, but they probably didn't know that. Perhaps the person had spiked their food or drink. That might explain why Darius and the twins hadn't been affected. They tended to choose and print their own food. She began to run through the people who had the opportunity to adulterate her meals or drinks. It was a short list. If the water dispenser in the galley nearest her suite had been contaminated, it would have affected far more people than just her. And she usually ate with Bryce. If their dishes had been poisoned, he would be in sickbay too. An impossible idea began to form in her mind. Surely it couldn't have been. Bryce walked in. "The doc called to say you'd woken up. She said she'll be in soon. She's waiting for some test results. How are you feeling?" He drew up a chair and sat down. "Like shit. What happened?" "You fainted. Jackson caught you one-handed. It was pretty impressive." "Fainted, huh?" Now she thought about it, she hadn't been feeling great for a while. The farce with the mercs at Lakshmi had distracted her. "And what were you doing while all this was going on?" "Watching in wonder." He was smiling, but then his expression turned serious. "You gave me a fright. The doctors don't seem to know what's wrong with you." "How long have I been out?"
"An hour or so."
"What about Parthenia and Jace? Did the doc say anything about them?" His expression grew more serious.
"You can add Fern and Oriana to the list. They're in another room."
"The twins as well? Damn! Darius?"
"He's fine."
"Thank the stars."
"The docs think you all have the same problem, whatever it is."
"Makes sense." The throbbing in her head surged, and she let out a groan. Bryce gently touched the side of her face.
"It's really bad, isn't it? Parthenia said she felt like buffaloes were stampeding through her brain before the sedative kicked in."
"She did? That's why they put her out?"
"Yeah, they said it would help her to get some rest. Karina, Darius told me he can still cast. Is that right?"
"It is. He sent to me when he was on the Peregrine and I was in Lakshmi. What a bunch of idiots we were to not check with him. I could have sworn I'd asked him to try a cast, but apparently not."
"But if that's so, can't he heal you all?"
"It doesn't work like that. Heal fixes injuries, like cuts, wounds, burns, and broken bones. It doesn't cure diseases. Don't you think I would have cured you when you had Ithian plague if I could? It would have been easy. And I would have healed Ma in a heartbeat. You know that."
"Of course, I wasn't thinking."
She didn't go on to tell him heal also couldn't save people near death. It wasn't strictly true. A spirit mage could do it, but only at the risk of killing themselves in the process. Darius had done it for her once, and she didn't want him to ever be put in the same position again. It was better to not remind Bryce of the fact. She looked at her sleeping sister. They'd had their differences, but she didn't know what she would do if anything bad happened to her. Watching Parthenia, Bryce said quietly,
"Have you ever considered the fact she might be your full sister?"
Karina almost sat up in surprise, but managed to stop herself just in time, mindful of her aching head. "What makes you say that?"
"You look incredibly alike. Anyone who saw you would guess you were related. And though I only saw your mother a little, I'd say you both resemble her closely. I can't see anything of Stefan Scherer in Parthenia."
Karina had been 3 years old when Stefan had tricked Ma and Bar into revealing themselves as mages and taken them prisoner. She didn't know the exact dates it all happened, but it was possible Ma had already been pregnant when Stefan raped her. She might not have known, or she might have kept the fact secret the rest of her life, fearing her tormentor would kill Parthenia if he found out. Stars, you could be right.
"Something to think about. You share similar traits too."
"What kind of traits?"
"Oh, I'll let you figure that out."
Huh. They were both stubborn, argumentative, and sometimes difficult to get along with. It was definitely something to think about. Though Bryce had spoken in a teasing tone, his face remained full of concern.
"I'll ask the doc to give you a painkiller."
He began to get to his feet, but at that moment Dr. Asher arrived. The Black Dogs had 2 military doctors, Asher and Baxter. Dr. Asher was a woman in late middle age who had worked for the band ever since Karina could remember, and Baxter was a man in his 20s who had joined just before Karina reconnected with the band. He was young for a merc. Most had completed a few tours by the time dishonourable discharge, mental instability, or a traumatic event drove them to pursue professional soldiering. To Karina's knowledge, Baxter had never explained why he'd chosen the more haphazard, riskier life among the Black Dogs over a Space Fleet career and guaranteed pension. And, as was usual, no one had asked him. Karina preferred Dr. Asher. She wasn't exactly what you would call motherly, unless motherhood entailed barking at people with any non-life-threatening ailment that they needed to get over themselves. But if she took your injury or ailment seriously, you could trust her to do her level best to help, and she never treated the kids with anything less than her utmost care and concern, whereas Baxter was always distant and offhand, regardless of the severity of his patient's condition. "I have to hand it to you, Karina," Asher said as she walked in. "You guys have us stumped." "You don't know what's wrong with us?" "Not a clue. You're hurting, right?" Asher held up a pressure syringe. Bryce helped Karina sit up. "This won't knock me out, will it?" she asked as Asher lifted her sleeve. "I want to talk to you." "No, it won't knock you out. It'll just take the edge off." A cool blast from the syringe spread through her veins. The pain in her head eased. She could still feel it, but the medication also made her care less. "You really have no idea at all what's wrong with us?" "I know what you don't have. You don't have any of the hundreds of viruses our antivirals can tackle, or a bacterial infection. You don't have cancer, and you aren't suffering from radiation sickness. The tests didn't show any genetic abnormalities only manifesting now, either." Karina found her last comment interesting. Whatever was different about Mage genes, it didn't show up as abnormal. "I was wondering if we'd been poisoned." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "You too, huh? A tox screen was the first test I ran. Zilch. That doesn't mean we weren't poisoned though, does it? Only that the test didn't pick it up."
"Isn't that a little paranoid?" Bryce asked. "Who would want to poison you?"
"It was the first test she ran," Karina protested. "It was, but I have a complete lack of faith in humanity. It seems I'm not alone." "So what happens now?" asked Karina. "We continue to monitor you, and Baxter and I will rack our brains trying to figure out what's wrong. We haven't exhausted all possibilities yet, only ruled out the most common ailments. How are the twins and Jace doing?" "About the same as you. Only Fern and Oriana complain more." "Does the order we fell ill in mean anything?" "Not necessarily. You all exhibited symptoms within 24 hours. That's a standard range, given the variability of the human response to illness. Do you think it has something to do with losing our mage powers? The correlation would certainly be worth investigating if we knew the first thing about what you do, or used to be able to do, but unfortunately we don't, so we'll be ignoring that for now. Unless, of course, you can shed some light." Karina shook her head. "I'm as much in the dark as you." "That's what I thought." Chapter 26. Karina had been in sick bay a week, and she was going out of her mind. "Would you please stop huffing and puffing?" Parthenia snapped. "It's bad enough being stuck in here as it is, without having to listen to you all day." "I can't help it. Something's going on, but I don't know what. Bryce hasn't been in to see us today, and I heard a commotion outside this morning. Since then it's been silent. Why hasn't anyone told me what's going on? Because you're sick. They don't want to bother you. It's more of a bother not to know. Why the big secret? Why would knowing what's happening hurt me? Because you would fret and worry and get annoyed when they won't let you stick your oar in for once. I wouldn't be sticking my oar in. I'd be giving them the benefit of my advice. Anyway, I'm the unofficial leader of the mission. If something important happens, I should know about it, even if I am sick. Oh, it hurts to be left out, Parthenia asked archly. Who would have thought? Karina cast a glance at her sister. She wasn't looking at her as she spoke. She was watching something on an interface propped up in bed. They were both on high doses of painkillers, anti-nausea medication, and other medicinal treatments that counteracted their ever-worsening symptoms. If it hadn't been for the meds, neither of them would have been able to function at all. As it was, watching endless hours of mindless entertainment was about all they were capable of. That and sniping at each other. More than once, Karina had contemplated asking the docs to transfer her to another room. Spending time with Parthenia only added to her problems. She guessed they'd been put in the same room so they could keep each other company. What a great idea that had been. She thought about Bryce's guess that they were full sisters. As the day had passed, she had begun to believe he was right. From certain angles, Parthenia looked like a slightly younger version of herself. If they'd had the same hairstyle, their similarities would have been even more apparent. Personality-wise, their characters were not quite so alike, despite Bryce's hints, but their differences could be explained by their upbringing. Parthenia was far more fussy and particular, especially about things like manners and decorum. Karina couldn't have been more different. Spending your adolescence on the streets and then living among mercs didn't exactly teach you the refinements of polite society. Their greatest difference was Parthenia seemed to feel responsible for the welfare of all humanity, while Karina, she freely admitted, only really cared about the people she knew. That could be explained by their upbringing too. Parthenia had grown up the eldest child in a very dysfunctional family. She had had the concept of duty to others drilled into her, whereas Karina had been trained by Nai to look after herself and trust no one. "Do you have to do that?" Parthenia asked, looking at her from the corners of her eyes. "Sorry." Karina turned away. She hadn't mentioned Bryce's guess about their shared parentage, and she wasn't sure she should. It might make her sister dislike her even more. "What are you thinking?" asked Parthenia. "I'm still wondering what's happening out there." "For goodness sake! If it matters that much, why don't you go and find out?" "You know, I think I will." "No, I didn't mean it. We have to rest. That's what Dr. Asher said. And it's doing us a lot of good, isn't it? We're getting sicker and sicker every day, and every day they up our doses. What's going to happen when they can't increase them anymore? I can't stand lying here like an animal waiting to be slaughtered. I'm going to find out what's going on or die trying." Even she had to admit her words were melodramatic. She didn't think they were close to death. She hoped they weren't, if not for her own sake, then for Jace and her siblings. But her current situation was beyond frustrating. She felt helpless and useless. She had to act. Pushing back her covers, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. "Karina, cut it out! Stay where you are or I'll call the medic." Karina had argued with the docs over their constant surveillance. Being watched all the time made her uncomfortable. She had made them agree to turn off monitoring when at least one of them was awake and able to sound the alarm. "Why do you have to be so prim and proper all the time? It's okay to break the rules now and then. That isn't what rules are for, and you know it. Look what happened on Lakshmi when the black dogs broke the rules. Parthenia, my dearest sister, would you please shut up? Karina had eased herself down from her bed while they bickered, and was now standing unsteadily next to it. Her prolonged inactivity made her weak. Coupled with her illness, she could barely stand. She felt like getting back into bed and having a long nap. But it would seem like she was obeying Parthenia, and that would only happen over her dead body. She pulled on a robe and shuffled toward the door. "Come back," Parthenia called. "You're sick. Go back to bed." When Karina didn't respond, she continued, "You look pathetic. You're making a fool of yourself." Karina winced, not because the words stung, though they did a little, but because they weren't something Parthenia would ordinarily say. She was echoing her monstrous father. Stefan Scherer had probably said exactly that kind of thing to Parthenia and her siblings while they were growing up. Not her monstrous father, Karina corrected herself. Her monstrous stepfather. As she reached the door, it slid open. She stepped out into the triage room, which was empty. In the centre of the deck were a few spots of blood. Someone had been hurt. Increasing her pace to a slow walk, she crossed the room to peer through the windows into the twins' and Jace's rooms. All were sleeping. Relieved that none of them seemed to be injured, she continued her journey, sneaking past the staff office and into the passageway. Her legs were already aching. Her surroundings seemed to be underwater, moving to and fro as if in a choppy current. Propping herself with one hand on the bulkhead for support, she went on. If only she could cast transport. The Bathsheba was so goddamned big, and she wasn't sure where to go. She couldn't comm anyone. They would only alert the medics about her escape. A little voice at the back of her head that sounded suspiciously like Nai scolded her for being dumb, but something drove her on. She couldn't let the others take over the running of the ship. What might happen to her siblings if she wasn't there to protect them? Ma had entrusted them to her care. She wasn't going to let her down. She stumbled and fell. The effort to get back to her feet threatened to take the last of her strength, but she managed it. As she became upright once more, she heard distant voices. There seemed to be a lot of them. The black dogs must have got together for some reason. Were they fighting? That would explain the blood on the triage room deck. It would be odd if the mercs were attacking each other. Though they weren't the most stable people, they'd generally gotten along pretty well since they'd escaped the Regians and dealt with the lot of Krillin's mutiny attempt. Adversity had bonded them more than ever, she'd thought. But maybe the trouble with Van Hasty, Rees, and the others at Lakshmi had divided them. The 7 mercs were responsible for losing over half the ship's funds. That wouldn't sit well with the rest of the black dogs. Weakness was overcoming her. If she tried to go back to the sick bay and act like nothing had happened, she would never make it. Better to press on and hopefully find out what was being hidden from her. The voices were growing louder. She was heading in the right direction. She could even hear snatches of conversation. "I've already explained," someone said. "This isn't a commercial venture." "Bryce, we understand," another voice replied. "We're here to appeal to your sense of human decency. Won't you at least consider our request? We have so much to offer you. Skills, creds, healthy females for breeding." Healthy females for breeding? Karina let out a gasp. The deck seemed to rise up at her, and that was the last thing she remembered. Chapter 27. "You have to stop making a habit of this," said Bryce as she came around for the second time. She was back in sick bay. It was like she was living a waking nightmare, passing out, waking up in a sick-bay bed, passing out, waking up in a sick-bay bed. Yet it was better than not waking up. "What's happening?" she asked groggily. "Am I going to be used for breeding?"
"What?"
Bryce put a hand to her forehead.
"Are you getting another fever? You don't feel hot." "Oh."
His features cleared.
"You overheard the leader of the party from March On."
"March On," Karina mumbled. Brain fog was clogging her thinking. But it still sounded wrong that people from March On were aboard the Bathsheba.
"I was going to tell you about it later after we dealt with them. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily."
She was about to say something similar to what she'd told Parthenia, that she worried more when she didn't know what was going on. But she couldn't utter so many words all at once. All she managed was, "What's happened?"
"We have visitors. Jackson and Justice are with them now. I wanted to check you were okay after the medics got you back into bed. You know, if I hadn't heard you fall in the passageway, you could have been lying there a while before someone found you. Please don't do that again. I'm sorry, but I have to go now."
Her head was beginning to clear a little. She touched his arm. "Tell me what's going on." He hesitated.
"It would take too long to explain. Jackson and Justice need my input to sort this problem out. But you can see it all on the security vids. I'll find them for you."
Dr. Asher burst into the room, her expression full of fury. "I'm reliably informed you were found unconscious in a passageway 100 meters from here." As she spoke, she marched to Karina's side. "So you repay all my hard work in treating you by leaving your bed and wandering around the ship? She pushed up Karina's sleeve to her shoulder and pressed the cool steel head of a pressure syringe into her biceps. The relief from confusion and aches and pains that spread out from the injection was blissful. "Listen to me, young lady," said Asher, leaning closer. "As it apparently wasn't obvious to you that you need to stay put, I'm making it an express order. You have been warned. Defy me at your peril. I'll be back soon to see what damage you've done to yourself. One of my more deserving patients needs me right now." She stomped out.
"Well, that's you told," Bryce remarked. "Seriously, Karina, that was a dumb stunt you pulled. You're not invincible, and you're not vital to the running of the ship. We can cope without your input, and we want to. Everyone wants you to get better, not kill yourself."
He reached for the interface next to the bed and gave commands for it to bring up the relevant vid feeds.
"Can you sit up?"
She nodded. He helped her to a sitting position and swung the screen around on its arm so it faced her.
"Take it easy. I'll come back and update you as soon as I can."
He bent down to kiss the top of her head, and then he was gone. While all this was going on, Karina hadn't been able to see Parthenia's reaction. Predictably, her sister was giving her a hard-eyed stare. As soon as their gazes met, Parthenia curled a lip in disgust and turned away. A heavy weight settled on Karina's chest and her ribs felt constricted. She struggled to breathe, but it wasn't anything to do with her illness. Blinking away the blurriness in her vision, she told the interface to play the vids. The first was a recording of the exterior of the ship. Another vessel was approaching, a battered, pockmarked craft far smaller than the Bathsheba. Most starships were. Her thrusters reversed and the ship slowed to a stop. Frustratingly, there was no audio with the recording. The foreign starship must have hailed the Bathsheba. Karina would have liked to hear the conversation that took place, but her mind was too befuddled to find the recording made on the bridge. The colony ship's weapons were too old and inadequate to protect her from sustained attack, but no one aboard her would have gone down without a fight. No pulses had been fired, however, which meant the black dogs had agreed to meet the visitors. A short, rigid umbilicus extended from the newcomer's ship and disappeared out of view as it attached to the Bathsheba's hull. The recording showed nothing more. The umbilicus was opaque, but the visitors must have crossed it and come aboard. What had happened in the triage room? Who had dripped blood on the deck? Bryce had found the vid for her. She watched the sickbay doors draw apart and men pour in. A few were black dogs. Bryce was there too, but most of the rest were unfamiliar. Dressed in leathers, rough-shaven and shaggy-haired, the men looked nothing like the people she'd seen on Lakshmi. She guessed only soldiers or wealthy citizens could visit the station. These men were different. They were clustered around an individual who sagged, supported by his companions, his arms over the shoulders of two of them. Dr. Baxter appeared from the staff room. "Please help," said one of the men. "His bleeding won't stop and our blood generator's broken." "All right, put him over there." But as the men moved, the patient slipped from their grasp. There were too many people around him to see what happened, but Karina heard the thud of him hitting the deck. They gathered him up quickly and carried him to the bed. Conversations went on between the visitors and Bryce and the black dogs while Baxter did his work, but there were too many and the voices too indistinct to hear. She watched intently. Where had the Marchonish man gone after Baxter treated him? With surprise and alarm, she saw him carried into a room. He was still in the sick bay. Fern and Oriana were here, and Jace too. They were all ill and could no longer cast. What if the stranger tried to hurt them? She pushed the interface out of the way and moved to get out of bed. "What are you doing?" Parthenia demanded. "Don't tell me you're going to get up again. Someone's here, in the sick bay." "What are you talking about? I think you're being delirious. I'm calling Dr. Asher." But there was no need. An instant later, Asher walked in. Her gaze took in Karina's position, half out of bed. Her lips pursed and her eyes narrowed. "Am I going to have to permanently sedate you, Carina Lin? The man they brought in, the Marchonish man, where is he? Is he still here? Is he under guard? Who's protecting the mages? How did you—" Asher's gaze drifted to the interface. "I see." Her expression lost some of its rigidity. "You don't have anything to worry about." "I really wish," Karina said through her teeth, mustering the little energy she had, "people would stop telling me not to worry." After giving an exasperated sigh, the doctor said, "The man from Marchon isn't currently in a position to do anyone any harm, considering he's under general anaesthetic while having a damaged artery repaired. Does that answer your questions?" Karina flopped backward onto her pillows and closed her eyes. "Honestly," Asher went on, "your lack of confidence in others is alarming. Do you think you're the only person capable of doing anything around here? Or that we would put your siblings and friend at risk of harm?" "No," Karina murmured, lifting a weary hand to rub her eyes. "I just feel so useless." This seemed to soften Dr. Asher's attitude somewhat. "Baxter and I are doing everything we can to get to the bottom of your illness. But you have to let us do our job and stop making things harder for everyone. Okay. Good. Now stop Asher paused and smiled, tight-lipped. "Remember, everything is under control on the ship. You should get some sleep. Would you like something to help you drift off?" "No, I'm fine." When Asher had left, Karina pulled the interface in front of her again. Chapter 28. Darius peeked around the edge of the door into the mission room. The Marchonish men were lounging around, sitting on the tables, resting a foot on a chair, or leaning against the walls. A couple were lying stretched out on the floor. They were waiting for something. Bryce, Justice, and a few black dogs had gone into another room and closed the door. Darius guessed the visitors were waiting to be told something, and Bryce and the others had to decide what to tell them. Maybe it had something to do with the weapons Karina wanted to buy at Lakshmi station. Maybe the men from Marchon wanted to offer them a better price. He didn't like them. They felt dark and dangerous. Kind of like Castiel and that man on Magog, Kai Wei, but not quite the same. The darkness in the Marchonish men was cloudy and murky, while Castiel and Wei's had been hard and sharp, like a black diamond. Nala giggled behind him. "I want to see too," she whispered. "Okay, swap places." He let Nala go in front of him to take a turn at watching the visitors. He wasn't sure they were supposed to be here, but on the other hand, no one had told them to stay away. Everyone had been busy lately. First, they'd been talking about Karina and the others being sick, and now they were talking about the men who had turned up and asked to come aboard. He hadn't been able to hear everything they said, but he thought maybe they wanted to come with them to Earth. Their leader had said something about them being tired of the war and wanting to start a new life somewhere else. They'd spotted the Bathsheba near Lakshmi station, and so they'd come to find out who owned her. He didn't think any one person owned her. Everyone owned a little bit of her, even him and Nala. Nala looked over her shoulder and whispered, "They're so big and ugly." That was a bit rude, and he didn't join in her giggles. But Nala couldn't help it. She'd been different since the attack on Deck Zero. It wasn't only her body that was different. She couldn't walk properly anymore. She was different too. She wasn't interested in finding things out, and she was always happy to play with him now. Before, she'd only played because she wanted to be kind. Now he felt like he was the kind one. At first he'd been glad he didn't have to keep asking to get her attention. It was fun to have a full-time playmate, but then he'd felt bad. She was like that because she'd had an accident that was partly his fault. If he'd been thinking better, he would have transported them out from Deck Zero before they fell asleep. Then Nala wouldn't have been hurt. He still loved her, but he wanted the old Nala back, even if it meant returning to being lonely sometimes. "Hey," said a voice, "we have a little spy." "What? Where?" "Oh yeah, I see her." Oh no, Nala had been spotted. "Come here, little one. We won't hurt you." Darius grabbed the back of her shirt. He hissed, "Don't go in." She didn't understand the men were bad. "I want to," she protested. She pulled her shirt out of his hand and limped into the room. "That's it," said a voice. "What a cutie." Darius didn't know what to do. Should he tell Bryce what Nala was doing? They probably shouldn't be here. It was like Deck Zero all over again. Clutching his elixir bottle, he followed her. This time he wouldn't let Nala down. She was smiling up at a tall man. This one looked older than the others, and though his friends' muscles showed on their stomachs and arms, they weren't wearing shirts, only vests for some reason. The man Nala was looking at was softer and flabbier. His gut overhung the top of his pants. If he'd been a black dog, the mercs would have teased him about it. "What's your name?" the man asked Nala. "There's another one," someone called out. "This place is a nursery. Kids everywhere." "It'd be good if they'd let us fill it with our kids," someone else grumbled. "I'm Nala," Darius's sister replied, "and he's Darius." He wanted to tell her to be quiet and to get out of here. But now he was in the room, the men would hear him. "Nala and Darius," said the tall man. "Nice names. And you're a pretty little thing." He put a finger under Nala's chin and tilted it to look at her face more closely. Darius didn't think anyone had ever told Nala she was pretty. His family didn't talk much about how people looked, unless they were commenting on Fern and Oriana's new clothes designs. Nala seemed to like the compliment because she smiled wider. "Take another turn about," said the man. She frowned. She didn't understand, but Darius did. He clutched his elixir bottle tighter. "Damn, I wish those mercs would hurry up and come to a decision," said a Marchonish man. "I don't," someone replied. "They can take as long as they like, as long as they say yes. What do they have to talk about? We made them a great offer. Men, supplies, female companions. This is a colony ship, but it's damn near empty from what I can tell. They need more bodies if they want to survive. You're right. How many have we seen? 10? 20? And all the time we've been waiting, we've seen no one else except these brats. Ship's damn near rattling like a pod with only 3 peas. You know, we might even outnumber them." This drew a pause from the group. Again, Darius knew exactly what was going through their minds. He would have to tell Bryce what he'd heard, but he wasn't going anywhere without Nala. He couldn't leave her. He wouldn't leave her alone with these men. "Kid," the tall man said, appearing to remember her presence. "I said take a turn about." "I don't understand." "Walk around the room." Darius was confused too. Frowning, Nala stepped away from the man. She had walked badly ever since the accident. One of her feet dragged because her leg didn't lift it high enough and she had to rise up on the other leg. It made her go up and down when she walked. She looked a bit strange, but Darius had never said anything about it. The tall man laughed. "This one's defective, guys. They should send her back to the shop." The other Marchonish men joined in his laughter. Nala halted and turned. She wasn't as smart as she used to be, but she wasn't so stupid she didn't know when she was being laughed at. Her hands clenched, and she looked like she was going to cry. "Be quiet," Darius said to the men. "Don't be mean." "Oh, she your sister?" asked the pudgy one. "It's okay, we're just having fun." "Come on, Nala, let's go." She hesitated, but then set off toward him. The men burst out laughing again. Darius thought it would all be over when Nala reached him and they would go, but one of the men walked in front of her, blocking her path. "Don't leave us, honey. We love to watch you. Walk over there." He pointed at the corner of the room. Nala tried to step around him, but he was too quick. Everywhere she tried to go, he was there first. His friends were laughing loudly now. Nala's face crumpled and she began to sob. "Leave her alone!" Darius shouted. He ran over to grab her hand and drag her away, but the man thrust a hand onto his chest and forced him back. "Probably shouldn't do that," the tall man said. "They won't mind us messing with her, but it'll piss 'em off if we hurt one of their sons." The man blocking Nala didn't take any notice. He pointed at the corner again. "Over there with your funny walk, little girl." "No!" she yelled, her face red and wet. Darius couldn't stand it any longer. He should probably go and find Bryce or someone else and tell them what was happening. But that would mean leaving Nala alone, and who knew what the horrible visitors might do to her while he was gone. He didn't have a choice. He had to protect his sister. He unscrewed the lid of his elixir bottle and took a sip. Chapter 29. The black dogs had taken the men from the visiting ship into the mission room. That's where they'd been when she'd heard them talking. The security vid showed the mercs telling the men to sit down and explain why they were here. Thankfully, this vid had audio. "Isn't it obvious?" a man who had introduced himself as Porcher asked. He was taller and older than the rest, though far less fit. He seemed to be their leader. The same reason as you. Which is? Asked Van Hasty. She'd mostly healed up since the bar fight on Lakshmi, only the cut on her nose remaining. Giving her a dismissive look, Porcher addressed his reply in the general direction of the male mercs. We're colonists too. We want a better future for our sons. As it is, they'll have to choose between dying in battle or making a miserable living in a munitions plant or mine. We plan on leaving Marchon and settling somewhere else, preferably a virgin planet. But we're open to suggestions. What happened to the guy in sickbay? Jackson asked. A disagreement that turned into a fight, that's all. Tensions are high on Marchon. Our government's been pushing for another assault on Gugong. Some of us want to stick it to them. Others want peace, saying the war's gone on too long. People are going crazy. We're at each other's throats. The man responsible for the injury apologised when he'd cooled down, but we couldn't stop the bleeding. We're grateful for your help. You say you're colonists, said Van Hasty, but you didn't come here on a colony ship. Again, Porcher acted as though a male merc had spoken, focusing on them for his reply. That's what we've come to discuss with you. Van Hasty's eyebrows rose, and she held a hand in front of her face, as if checking she existed. Karina smiled. Porcher's weird behaviour hadn't gone unnoticed among the Black Dog men either. Jackson's gaze met Van Hasty's before he returned his attention to the Marchonish leader. Let me guess, you want to be colonists, but you're missing one essential requirement, a colony vessel. So you're here to hitch a ride. With an abashed grin, Porcher nodded. We spotted your ship 10 days ago, but it took us a while to gather everyone and make our way to you. We've been planning this for years, though to be honest at times it seemed like an impossible dream. We've brought plenty of supplies as well as equipment for settling the new planet. Ground breakers, seeds, water purifiers, generators, medicines, dwelling kits, the lot. And we're young and strong. We didn't bring anyone over 50. I barely made the cut-off myself. He smiled again and ran a hand over his hair. Over the years, as we talked about leaving Marchon, the biggest problem was we didn't know where to go. We're at war with the nearest habitable planets. We would never be accepted there. And to be honest, we aren't exactly sure what the other options are. All we knew was we needed a bigger, more powerful ship than we had, if we wanted to go anywhere else. And then you guys turned up. The galaxy's a big place, right? There has to be a better world, a better life for us somewhere. Karina stopped the recording. She felt a smidgen of sympathy for the would-be colonists. Despite their odd attitude to women, decades of war must have taken its toll on their world. Rather than working to improve the general standard of living for all their citizens, their labour had been hijacked to increase the wealth of a small elite. Stars, their lives had been hijacked, sacrificed in bloody, pointless military campaigns with enemies who were just as hoodwinked and ignorant. But the Black Dogs didn't know that. She hadn't had a chance to tell anyone what Bongo had said. She had fainted before she got the words out. Parthenia? What? Her sister replied sullenly, not looking at her. After we got back from Lakshmi, did you tell Bryce or anyone else about the real reason for the Three Systems War? I was too busy vomiting. Should I have? I was just wondering. You know about the Marchonish visitors? I'm right next to you, Karina. How couldn't I overhear what Bryce said? A simple yes would have been enough, but she let it go. They want to join the ship. What do you think? Join the ship to go where? We haven't decided if we're still going to Earth, remember? Personally, I'd be happy to survive another couple of weeks. You think you're going to die? I think we're going to die. You have the same disease, don't forget. We've been getting sicker and sicker, and no one knows why. Asher and Baxter are good doctors, but even they can't figure it out. What does that tell you? Parthenia had been focused on her interface for most of her speech, but she turned to Karina as she asked her question with fear in her eyes. It tells me... Karina bit her lip before continuing hastily. We shouldn't worry about things we can't control. Nice cop-out, sis. Karina rested her head on her pillows. Were they going to die? If they died, Oriana, Fern and Jace would die too. Bryce would have to raise Darius and Nala by himself. Darius would be alone as a mage. Strike that. He was already alone as a mage, but with his brothers and sisters around, at least he would have people near him who knew what it meant. The idea of Darius and Nala losing their entire family was too painful to contemplate. She decided to concentrate on the problem of the visitors from Marchon. 2 groups occupying the same ship for a long voyage had been a recipe for disaster in the past. The Lotokrillans had mutinied and murdered Calverley, and they could have killed Jace too. But, thinking about it, the idea of living alongside the men from Lotokrilla had been doomed from the start. The Merc's introduction to them had been a hard-fought, bloody battle. How could anyone have imagined the 2 sides would ever get along? The Marchonish colonists didn't have any history with the Black Dogs, and they would be coming along willingly, unlike the Lotokrillans, who'd had little choice in the matter. As she saw it, the biggest sticking point was Marchon culture. Their dismissive behaviour toward Van Hasty and the comment about females for breeding were telling. If they did join the Bathsheba, she could foresee difficulties ahead as their poor attitude toward women came up against Van Hasty's fist. A wistful pang hit as she remembered Atoy. What would she have made of the Marchonish men? Something broken and bloody, probably. But maybe, if they were willing to accept a different way of thinking, it could work. It would certainly solve some of the problems she and the Black Dogs faced with manning the ship during her long journey. Greater numbers meant less time spent with the Bathsheba flying on automatic. Was it worth the risk? What are you thinking about? Parthenia asked. What we should do about the party from Marchon. You want to let them join us? I haven't decided. What do you think? Why should we help them? They're stupid, aren't they? They deserve everything they get. Parthenia was referring to their conversation at the restaurant on Lakshmi Station. I didn't say that exactly. Yes, you did. You said the people from the planets at war should just rise up and take over their governments, and they were stupid for not doing it. Karina was silent. But things aren't so simple, are they? Okay, I admit you have a point. Seeing them and hearing them speak throws a different light on things. So what do you think we should do with them, Smarty Pants? I think we should leave it to the Black Dogs to decide. They're the majority here, and since we lost our mage powers, there's nothing special about us to give us any greater say in the decision-making. She sighed. All I want to do is to get better. Whether the Marchonish group stay or go, I only want to be well again. Karina held out her hand across the gap that separated their beds. Parthenia looked at it for a moment before grasping it. Me too, sis, Karina said. Me too. Chapter 30. Darius opened his eyes. He was in the Twilight Dome, and Nala was with him. She hugged him tightly. Thank you, Darius. Thank you for taking me with you. Of course I took you with me. You're my sister. She released him and looked down. I'm different from you, though. I can't cast like you. You're not different anymore. I'm the only one who can cast now. I'm the one who's different. Nala looked up and smiled brightly. It doesn't matter. Those men were horrible, weren't they? I thought it would be fun to talk to them, but they were nasty. Yeah, they were. Darius thought for a moment. Let's stay here a while. I don't think it was a good idea to cast in front of them, but I didn't know what else to do. If I'd left you there, they might have hurt you. I'm glad you didn't. She turned her gaze upward to the starscape shining through the transparent sections of overhead. Look, it's so pretty. Darius nodded. The old Nala would have told him the names of the stars and planets, and probably what types and how far away they were too. All the new Nala saw was their prettiness. It hurt. He sat down and tried hard not to cry. What shall we do? Asked Nala. I don't know. Play hide and seek? The room seemed a good place for the game. It was full of tables and chairs of all different kinds, and there were bars in the corners and along the walls. The lighting was dim too, which meant lots of shadows. Okay, Nala agreed. You hide first while I count. No, you hide and I'll count. He didn't feel completely safe here. He was worried the Marchonish men might be looking for them. Maybe they weren't done with teasing Nala. The Bathsheba was so big the men would probably never find them, but it was better to be careful. He had to keep his sister safe. He covered his eyes and began counting. As he counted, he heard Nala moving around as she looked for a good place to hide. She wasn't being careful to be quiet. He could hear she had gone to the left-hand side of the room. 35, 36. They hadn't agreed whether he should count to 50 or 100. As they were only playing in one room, 50 should be enough. But if he stopped there, Nala might say he was cheating. He reached 50 and stoically continued, though he couldn't hear her any more. She had found her place to hide and was waiting for him. You can look for me now, she called out. He took his hands away from his face and rolled his eyes. She had given her hiding place away just about. She had shouted from somewhere on his left, near the hull. Should he make a show of looking for her everywhere else first, so she didn't feel bad about being found quickly? He set off. But someone was comming him. Hi, said Bryce, sounding relieved. Where are you? When he told him, Bryce went on, Darius, did you go to see the people from Marchon? Before he could answer, Bryce added, It's very important you tell me the truth. His guts seemed to squirm. Nala popped up from under a table. Who are you talking to? Bryce. What? Bryce asked. I was speaking to Nala. She's there with you? That was my next question. Yeah, she's here. Do you want to talk to her? No, Darius. I can calm her too, remember? Did you go to see the Marchonish men? The tone Bryce was using, as well as his reminder to tell the truth, was making Darius uncomfortable. A hot feeling spread up from his neck and over his face. If you did, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. No one told you to stay away from them. I thought you were both in your suite, but it doesn't matter. That's my fault, not yours. Only, I need to know if they've seen you. Yeah, Darius admitted. We were spying on them, but they saw us. He swallowed. They were mean to Nala, Bryce. Really mean. I can believe it. What else happened? His distance from Bryce meant he couldn't feel his emotions, but he heard something in the man's tone. He was trying to make what he said sound unimportant, but in fact it was very important. Bryce was asking if he'd cast in front of the Marchonish men. He wanted to deny it. Mother and Karina had told him many times he mustn't cast around people who weren't mages. He wanted to explain to Bryce why he'd been forced to do it, how he hadn't had any choice. But all that came out was a very soft, quiet, I cast transport. Bryce's heavy sigh rattled out of the comm button. Sorry. You don't have to be sorry. You're just a kid, but it's made things tricky for us. Can you promise me something? Yes, what? That you'll stay right where you are.
Some black dogs will be there in a couple of minutes.
I promise.
You and Nala, right?
Me and Nala.
And please don't cast again, not unless your life depends on it.
Or Nala's.
All right, or Nala's.
Bryce cut the comm. We have to stay here? Asked Nala. She had walked over while he'd been talking and must have heard the last part of the conversation. Yeah, but we can carry on playing, I guess. I don't feel like it. She slumped into a seat. What else do you want to do? I don't feel like doing anything. He sat down beside her. You know when you were showing me how to use my interface yesterday? She asked. Uh-huh. They'd watched a show together, and she'd wanted to know how to find more things to watch. I found something I wrote before my accident. You did? He feared what was coming next. Emotions were pouring out of Nala like a waterfall tumbling over a cliff. Sorrow, confusion, and worry. I didn't understand it, she said. How come I wrote it, but now I can't understand it? How's that possible? He didn't know what to say. Even if he knew a doctor's explanation for what had happened to her, which he didn't, he felt she was asking something more. How could it be right that she'd gone from being so smart to someone who could barely read? He didn't know how to make her feel better. Since they'd come to Lakshmi Station's system, everything had gone wrong. Nala and he had nearly died on Deck 0, and she would never be the same again. Karina and his other siblings had lost their special abilities, and they'd all gotten so sick he couldn't bear thinking about it. Then the people from Marchon had arrived, and now they knew he could cast. The doors opened and light from the passageway lit up the entrance, creating silhouettes of the 4 heavily muscled figures who stood there. For a terrifying instant, Darius thought the Marchonish men had found them. But then he recalled his conversation with Bryce. He also noticed one of the figures had lost an arm. "Hey kids," said the one-armed man. "Uncle Jackson's here to look after you." Chapter 31. Bryce closed the comm to Darius. Shit, shit, shit. Jackson had listened into the conversation and immediately left with Reese and 2 more black dogs. Bryce didn't doubt the mercs would protect Darius and Nala with their lives, but the situation was getting seriously out of hand. The group from Marchon had turned from an annoying problem into a real threat, and if he hadn't been paying attention to what a Marchonish man said, he might have missed it. He'd sensed a change in the atmosphere when he'd returned with the mercs to the mission room. There was something different about the way the men looked at them, something hidden behind their friendly smiles and greetings. A menacing intent had entered their expressions. Jackson picked up on it too. He faked scratching his back to turn to Bryce and whisper, "Something's up. Do you think they guessed our decision?" "Nah, it isn't that." Jackson faced the group again, his eyes narrowing. Porcher stepped forward. "We appreciate your consideration of our proposal and are anxious to hear your response." Jackson had agreed to let the older man deliver the news. If Karina were well, she would have handled it, only she was so ill she had him seriously worried. Would she think they'd come to the wrong decision? Maybe not. Though she would be pissed off no one had asked her opinion. But what help was her opinion when she clearly wasn't thinking straight? "I'll get right to the point," said Jackson. "We've given your request serious thought, but the answer's no." "I see," said Porcher, not losing his fatuous smile. "Are you going to grace us with your reasoning? I guess you deserve that at least. 2 groups on the same ship won't work. We tried it in the past, and the other group ended up taking a spacewalk with no suits. We're not prepared to take the same risk again. That's about the long and short of it. Though several of us said they'd be happy to take your women." "Our women?" Porcher echoed before bursting into guffaws. He turned, amazed and amused, to his companions, who shared his reaction. A short period followed where the Marchonish men laughed, and Bryce and the mercs watched them in silence. When Porcher's laughter subsided, he wiped his eyes and said sarcastically, "A most generous offer. I can see why you would want our females, but they are not available." Bryce had a strong suspicion he entirely misunderstood the mercs' motivation. He thought the black dogs wanted the women for sex and children, but it had been Van Hasty who had suggested accepting the Marchonish women onto the ship in order to save them from the men who treated them like cattle. It didn't matter. Only the men were aboard the Bathsheba. The women were waiting on their ship and inaccessible. They would probably never learn they'd had a chance to escape their planet, but their men had refused on their behalf. "So that's it?" asked Porcher. "We leave now and you continue on your journey without us?" Jackson replied testily, "I'm not sure what else you expect. You came here uninvited, and we were gracious enough to allow you aboard and listen to what you had to say. You asked and we answered. The discussion's over." The tension in the room moved up a notch. Jackson had anticipated trouble. Every merc was carrying a handgun. A condition of entry for the Marchonish party had been that they were unarmed. That should have been the end of it. It would be suicide to go up against the mercs considering the imbalance of firepower. But the Marchonish men were surprisingly uncowed. "What if we refuse to leave?" asked Porcher. "I can't believe you would be so stupid," Jackson replied. Still, the men didn't move. "You're missing out on a great opportunity," said Porcher. "Maybe you should think it over some more." "We'll escort you back to your ship now," said Jackson. Porcher's arms jerked up, causing the mercs to reach for their weapons. He gave a fake yawn and stretched his arms wide. "No need to get jumpy, boys. We won't outstay our welcome." Someone muttered, "You already have." Slowly and lazily, the men who had been sitting got to their feet. The others began to move slowly toward the exit, the black dog stepping aside to give them room to pass. Some lacked Porcher's faux nonchalance and were grumbling and mumbling as they walked by. "We didn't have to give up so easy," one of them said. "Don't worry," his friend replied. "Once we get the word out about that kid, they won't be going anywhere." That was all Bryce heard, but he didn't need to hear any more. Dread rose up in him. There were only 2 kids on the ship the men from Marchon could have seen. He hadn't known they were in this section. The last time he'd seen Darius and Nala, they'd been playing happily in their room. No one would have any reason to get the word out about Nala. She was only a little girl battling the effects of her accident. But Darius? There was a lot to be told about Darius, or rather one thing in particular, and if anyone outside the Bathsheba knew about it, a world of trouble could descend on their heads. "Wait," he blurted. All movement in the room stalled. "What's up?" Jackson asked. He was at the door, waiting for the last of the visitors to leave. "I think we were too hasty. We should talk it over some more." Jackson frowned. "I don't think so. Everyone had their say and we voted, so—" "You're going to discuss it again?" asked a Marchonish man hopefully. "We don't have to leave?" "No," said Bryce. "You don't have to go yet." He pushed through the throng to the doorway, where Jackson was eyeing him quizzically. He called down the passageway to the departing men. "Come back in here. We're going to have another discussion about your proposal." Porcher had been leading his men back to the airlock. His head turned and he called, "What did you say?" Jackson said, "Bryce, what the fuck are you doing?" Ignoring him, Bryce answered Porcher. "You and your men can stay here tonight. We need more time to—" Jackson grabbed his arm. "Trust me," he hissed. Jackson gave him a dark look, but he released his hold. Yeah, you can all stay another few hours while we, hear some more opinions. Chapter 32. We have to kill them, said Van Hasty. What other choice do we have? After we've killed them, we board their ship, kill any other men we find, bring the women here, and then blow the ship up. The women don't know about Darius, and if we leave the system with them right away, when they find out it won't matter. Bryce couldn't help but think her opinion was coloured by attitudes to gender in Marchonish culture. But she did make some good points. They couldn't risk knowledge of Darius's abilities to leak to Marchon or anywhere else. Even a non-aggressive society would be very interested in a kid with mage powers, let alone 3 militaristic ones on the Bathsheba's doorstep. Yet he still had nightmares over the time they'd spaced the lot of Krillans. He wasn't sure he could do the same thing again or be a party to it. He didn't like the Marchonish men and thought their attitudes were ridiculous, but they hadn't actually done anything threatening. All they'd done was put their case for inclusion in what they believed was a colonization expedition. It wouldn't be right to kill them for something they might do. I know what you're thinking, said Van Hasty, watching him. But we aren't in court. We're not judges or a jury. We're talking about the life of a little kid, and all the rest of our lives too. It's them or us. You know what the fuckers would do if they got a chance. We do, Xiao agreed. But how do you know their women won't do the same? Why would they when we rescued them from those pricks? Bryce sighed and shook his head. I wish Jace was well enough to be here. Jackson snorted. Jace would want us to invite every bastard in the 3 systems aboard. He had given over guard duty to other mercs, who were currently guarding Darius and Nala in their suite, while the Marchonish men had been taken to the Twilight Dome to sleep. He would try to find a non-violent solution to the problem, said Bryce. That's what we're missing. There has to be an alternative to killing probably 100 men, and who knows how many women, because some of them saw something they shouldn't have. It's so ruthless. The Black's a harsh place, said Jackson, in a tone that made Bryce grateful he didn't add a patronising kid at the end of his sentence. You have to be ruthless to survive. I might say something, asked Justice. He hadn't taken part in the first discussion, saying he was a guest himself, so the decision should be up to the Black Dogs. But now the question had broadened out, he'd been invited to the meeting. Go ahead, said Xiao. Whatever we do with the Marchonish, we have to factor in our business on Lakshmi. We aren't done there yet. We haven't upgraded the Bathsheba's defences, and we were planning on restocking supplies before we left. Why does that matter? Van Hasty asked. Because we're aboard the biggest ship in the sky. The Marchonish group saw us, and we can be sure plenty of others are watching and listening in our direction too. If one of our visitors manages to get word out during your proposed slaughter, Marchon military might turn its attention from its enemies to us. So you're saying we should complete our business before we kill anyone? Asked Van Hasty. Not exactly, but close. Xiao explained. He's saying we need to finish dealing with Lakshmi before we deal with our problem here. That's it, said Justice. And what is our business with Lakshmi? Bryce asked. Karina hasn't been able to talk much since she got back, but as I understand it, no one on the station could help Nala. That's right, said Xiao. That's what she told me before she got sick. Damn, said Jackson. You need to talk to the doctors about replacing your arm, said Justice. That's not a priority now. I'm left-handed, so it isn't a big deal. Justice scoffed. You're planning on going all the way to Earth one-armed when you have the best medical facilities in the sector right here? He's right, said Van Hasty. Stop playing the martyr and get it fixed. I don't want to fight beside you unless you have 4 functioning limbs. How are you going to suit up, moron? All right, I'll get a new arm. But what are we going to do about the assholes in the dome? You know what I think, said Van Hasty. Nothing anyone says will change that. I'm going to check up on Karina while you guys make a decision. Her departure brought a pause to the discussion. Eventually Bryce said, There has to be another option than massacring a bunch of unarmed men. If there is, said Jackson, I'm not seeing it. Not if we want to keep Darius out of the hands of the first space fleet that manages to board our ship. 1 child's life against 100 others? Asked Bryce. 1 innocent life against a load of worthless shitheads, Jackson countered. What do you think, Justice? I see both sides. I'm military too, and I've seen more soldiers die in a minute than we're talking about here. But I'm sick of fighting and bloodshed. If there's a way we can avoid murdering those men, I'm willing to hear it. I feel the same, said Xiao. I can see the necessity, and if we were measuring the worth of 1 life against another, I would say Darius deserves to live more than anyone we've seen from Marchon or anyone here. The kid has a special gift that could be used to do a lot of good and improve the lives of millions. We have a duty to protect him at all costs. Plus, as we know, if we allow a hair of his head to be harmed, Karina will kill us all. True, Bryce agreed. I'd rather face the Marchon, Quinton and Gugon space fleets put together. But at the same time, Xiao continued, the idea of executing the men just because of something they know leaves a sour taste in my mouth. This is all fine and good, said Jackson, but I'm not hearing an alternative. There has to be another solution, said Bryce. What about taking them with us, but marooning them somewhere along our way? Too risky, Jackson replied. Once they're all aboard, I'm pretty sure they'll outnumber us. We would end up not waking up from deep sleep. No one mentioned the idea of swearing the Marchonish men to secrecy. That was plainly ridiculous. Jackson's comm chirruped. Porter wants a chat, said a voice at the other end. Damn, said Jackson. He must have guessed something's up. Maybe, said Bryce. I'll come with you. The Marchonish men had spread themselves out in the twilight dome, sprawling on the sofas and deck, making themselves at home in a way that left Bryce feeling uncomfortable. They were already acting as though they owned the place, and Porcher had an arrogant look in his eye. Over here, he said, beckoning. Jackson calmly halted and tucked his remaining thumb into his belt, refusing to bend to Porcher's power play. The Marchonish man was forced to walk over to them. A smile and a scowl struggled for control of his face. I was wondering how the talks are going. That's it? Jackson asked. That's why you made us come up here? You'll find out how the talks went when they're over. He turned to leave. That's not all. What else do you want? Jackson growled, turning back. There's something else you should know. What? Before we came here, we told a lot of people where we were going. Parents who were too old to come along. Friends and relations who wanted to stay on Marchon. They'll be waiting for news. If they don't hear from us soon, they'll inform the Marchon government, which will be interested in finding out what's happened to its citizens. That it? That's it, for now. After they left, Bryce said, You were right. He's guessed this isn't any longer about whether they can join us. Do you believe what he said about the Marchon government? Why would it give a shit about a couple 100 opportunists leaving its system? But it shows they aren't going to wait patiently for days on end for us to make up our minds. And we can't forget about the men they left behind on their ship. I'm going to double the guards on the airlock and the dome door. We need to come to a decision fast. Chapter 33. A shadow fell over Karina and she opened her eyes. A tall woman stood next to her bed, blocking the light. "Van Hasty?" "Hi." The merc dragged a chair over. Karina winced at the noise of chair legs scraping on tile. "How are you doing?" Van Hasty asked as she sat down. "It's nice of you to come and see me." If this woman was paying her a visit, she must be dying. Van Hasty wasn't renowned for her compassion toward her fellow mercs, or anyone else for that matter. "No problem." She rested her hands on her spread knees, bent forward and peered into Karina's face. "You look like shit." "Thanks." Karina turned onto her back and tried to sit up. After watching her for a couple of seconds in confused silence, Van Hasty helped her by grabbing her shoulders and hauling her upward. Then she bent her forward while adjusting her pillows and then thrust her into them. "Is that better?" Karina felt like she'd just finished basic again with the Shurers. "What's happening? No one's telling me anything." "That's what I thought. We have a big problem to sort out. Shao and the guys are talking about it now, but you should know what's going on too. It concerns Darius." "Huh?" She sat up straighter. "He's fine, but let me tell you what's been going on." Van Hasty began to explain the events of the last few hours, during which Karina had been wondering why Bryce hadn't been to see her, and why Asher had looked so worried when she had checked up on her. As she listened, her heart beat faster. Before the merc had finished her tale, she guessed where it was headed and broke in, "They know about Darius's ability." Van Hasty nodded grimly. "Damn it!" "Yeah. What are they going to do?" "That's what they're talking about. I gave them my opinion and came to see you." "Thanks. I appreciate it." But Karina didn't know what to tell the merc. She could barely think, let alone get up and go to the defense of her brother, which was her first impulse. Since she had collapsed in the passageway after trying to find out what was happening on the ship, she had felt sicker and sicker. Moving her limbs was a Herculean task. An industrial compactor had set up in her head, and even thinking about food caused her to retch for minutes at a time. Parthenia, meanwhile, seemed to have passed out entirely. She hadn't opened her eyes in hours. Karina wasn't sure if Asher or Baxter had given her a sedative, or it was the effect of their illness. She couldn't remember if the doctor had given her something. Her memory was hazy as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Seeming to sense she wasn't capable of forming coherent thoughts, Van Hasty got to her feet. "I shouldn't have bothered you. I didn't realize you were so sick." "No, stay. Or call Asher for me." When the doctor arrived, Karina asked her for a stimulant. "Why?" Asher looked from her to Van Hasty as if suspecting they were colluding to commit a crime. "I have to think something through, but I can't. My brain won't work." "Out of the question. You're already on the maximum doses of medications to control your symptoms, and you're far too weak. If I give you anything else, it could stop your heart or give you a stroke. I don't think you understand how sick you are." "Oh, I do. Believe me, but I have to be able to think. Darius is in danger. We all are." "You mean the group from March On?" The doctor pursed her lips and frowned at Van Hasty. "It was very unwise to come here and bother her with this." To Karina, she said, "Other people are perfectly capable of dealing with the problem. Leave them to it and concentrate on getting better." "Stop bullshitting me," Karina spat, though her voice was pathetically weak. "I'm not going to get better. You said yourself you and Baxter don't have the first clue what's wrong with me. Only one outcome is possible now. I don't have much time left, but what time I do have, I want to spend helping my brother. Give me something so I can think." The older woman stared at her, and for a second her stony expression broke, revealing anguish and guilt. She turned on her heel and marched out of the room without another word. Van Hasty raised her eyebrows. An uncomfortable pause followed. "Do you think she's gonna—" The door slid open and Asher returned, holding a syringe aloft like a weapon. She halted at Karina's bedside. "Do you take full responsibility?" "Yes. The doctor had forced the syringe against her upper arm, and its contents exploded into her bloodstream. A cleansing wave washed over her. Suddenly she knew how it was to be completely well again. Her mind cleared, the ache left her muscles, and she no longer felt like a lead weight was holding her down on the bed. Then her pulse began to pound, and her skin was instantly wet with sweat. Her hands began to tremble. But she could think. At last she could finally think. "I might know a way. Just give me a minute." "We have to kill them all, right?" said Van Hasty. Karina glanced at her sister, pale, thin, and asleep on the neighbouring bed. Maybe not. It took her longer than a few minutes to think up a plan, but when she had it, she felt confident it would work, and she hadn't forgotten anything. She told Van Hasty. As she spoke, the stimulant started to wear off. The lead weight began to descend again, pinning her to the mattress. The hammering in her head resumed, and the dreadful nausea returned. Dr. Asher had waited by her bed the entire time, watching the figures on the wall interface, tutting and shaking her head. When Karina had finished her short explanation, Van Hasty said, "I'll tell them. They might not agree, but I'll tell them." There wasn't anything else she could do. She was descending to the depths of her illness for what seemed like the last time. As Van Hasty was leaving, Karina asked Asher, "Am I dying?" "I haven't given up hope yet, and neither should you." Van Hasty halted at the door. "Everyone dies, Karina. The only win you get in life is outliving your enemies." Chapter 34. Porcher reached out and grabbed Bryce's hand before shaking it forcefully. He did the same with Justice, but, moving to shake Jackson's right hand, he hesitated, forgetting it was missing. He grinned and grasped his left hand instead. He awkwardly nodded at Shao and Van Hasty, and then, redirecting his attention to the men, he said, "I can't thank you enough. You've come to the right decision. You won't regret it." "We have some things to do before we leave the system," said Jackson. "You'll have time to get settled in. The Bathsheba's a big ship. There's plenty of room for everyone. I'd suggest spreading yourselves around, rather than all of you settling in one spot. It'll help you to integrate." "Right." Porcher paused and smiled uncomfortably. "I think we would prefer our women to remain aboard our ship for now. Maybe when we begin our voyage, we will bring them aboard. It will be necessary in order for them to go into deep sleep, naturally." "You what?" asked Van Hasty. "They can't come aboard?" Bryce nudged her with his elbow. "We understand you might be worried about them mingling with the black dogs, but you don't have anything to fear on that account. I've lived with the mercs for over a year. Contrary to their looks, they're very well behaved." "Thanks for the glowing endorsement," Jackson muttered. "Nevertheless," Porcher countered, "it would be better for all our females to stay apart from your company for the time being. Speaking as a Marchonish man, I can assure you that's what they want." Van Hasty burst out, "Well, aren't they lucky to have you?" "If that's what's best," said Bryce, "we'll take your word for it." "It is," said Porcher. "Now, if you don't mind, I'll tell my men the good news. Then some of us will return to our ship to begin bringing our belongings aboard." Porcher left with a spring in his step. "That's that done," said Jackson, after waiting for him to pass out of earshot. "So we aren't as bad as we look?" he asked Bryce. "Not quite." Jackson cuffed his head, though not hard. "I mean," Bryce went on, laughing, "you do have a few redeeming features." Jackson cuffed him again. "Quit it," said Shao. "He was only feeding the Marchonish prejudices. That's right, isn't it, Bryce?" "Yeah, something like that." Bryce suddenly remembered Karina, whose idea they were following, and his chest grew tight. The way things were going, she might not live to see the outcome of her plan. If the worst happened, how would he carry on without her? He would have to somehow for Darius and Nala's sake. Jackson's hand descended on his shoulder. "Coming with us to Lakshmi station?" "I don't know if I should. I think I should stay here and look after the kids." "They're coming too." "They are, but that wasn't part of the plan. Karina wouldn't approve. She would want us to keep them safe." "That's why we have to take them with us," Shao explained. "The people from Marchon know there's something special about them. They saw Darius and Nala disappear into thin air, so they're going to keep a very close eye on them from now on. It's much better for the kids to stick with us."
"Yeah," Bryce conceded. "You're right."
"Besides," Jackson said, "I'll be visiting the medical centres to see if they can shed any light on what's wrong with the mages, and talk to them about fixing my arm. I can ask them about treatment for Nala too. I might still find someone who can help her." The proposal of bringing the children along on their next visit to Lakshmi was making more and more sense.
"It's a shame the mages are too weak to go to the station," said Bryce. "We should have taken them there earlier."
"They deteriorated faster than anyone expected," said Shao sadly. "It's taken everyone by surprise. Only Jackson, Shao, Bryce, and now Darius and Nala would be going to Lakshmi. Van Hasty would remain behind to keep an eye on the Marchonish men, and they couldn't risk taking any other mercs due to the events of the previous visit. A similar episode might bankrupt them, and they needed all the funds they had to purchase the space weapon Karina had suggested. Bryce had heard so much about Lakshmi Station. Shao had described the hordes of people and aliens, and the huge numbers of shops and facilities. Karina had told him about the friend she'd made, the guide Bongo. Even Darius had chimed in, talking about the range of weird foods on the menu at the restaurant where he'd eaten. Yet none of it prepared Bryce for his first sight of the station from the Peregrine's Bridge. He had never seen so many starships of so many kinds in one place. There were battleships being serviced, repaired and fitted out, dwarfing the engineering vessels that flitted across and between them. Huge cargo haulers hung in space, too large to ever enter a planetary atmosphere. Commercial cruise liners floated along, sleek and luxurious, probably heading for exotic destinations. Or perhaps they were simply taking their passengers beyond any government's jurisdiction, where they could push the bounds of legal behavior without fear of repercussions. Private starships built for speed zipped along almost too fast to detect, and the station itself was vast. Easily the biggest man-made structure he'd ever heard of, let alone seen, and it was hard to imagine how it sustained itself. How could there be sufficient people in the surrounding area to support it? But then, he reminded himself, 3 entire worlds contributed to its existence. Billions of people, out of which probably only a fraction ever had the opportunity to visit. Though, from what he understood, hundreds of thousands lived on the station, either permanently or as part of an ever-changing contingent of migrant workers, shipped in from the 3 worlds and farther afield. "Where do we dock?" he asked Shao, noting what looked like lines of ships vaguely spiralling out from several of the many points of the star. "It wouldn't mean anything if I told you, but it's the same spot we docked the previous 2 times. The station authorities seem to want to keep us in one area." "Is visitor movement restricted inside?" "Not officially, The last time I was here, she looked abashed. We were taken far from the commercial zone, hours away, and I didn't see any signs prohibiting entry to anywhere. But my guess is most visitors never leave the district nearest their docking point. The place is too big, and you can find anything you might need in just one of the points of the star.
What goes on in the middle?
She shrugged. I'm not sure, but maybe it's where the permanent residents live. The arms dealers, tycoons, business moguls and so on. They don't want to mix with shoppers and tourists.
And they don't want to live on any of the planets.
No, and we know why. Van Hasty had returned from Karina's bedside with a horrific story. The war that maintained Lakshmi Station was artificially generated. Billions had given their lives so others could live in optimal luxury. It was no wonder the party from Marchon was desperate to escape. Despite the magnificence of the station's appearance, it sickened Bryce to go there. Simply setting foot on it would feel like he was contributing to the injustice. And they weren't only going there, they were fueling the economy by purchasing a weapon. He had tried to speak to Karina about her plan before he left, but she'd been too out of it to have a proper conversation. He'd only been able to hold her, tell her he loved her, and hoped she would get better soon. He'd said Darius and Nala were okay and not to worry, but he wasn't sure she'd understood. Silently, he watched the station grow larger until the point they were headed toward dominated the view. Chapter 35. When Bongo heard Karina and Parthenia were ill, his legs lost some of their tension and his body sagged between them. You should have brought them here. Lakshmi Station has the finest. They're too sick, Xiao interrupted. It started after they got back from their last visit. You don't think they contracted their illness here, do you? The station managers are usually excellent at maintaining high levels of hygiene. Some of our crew members fell ill before they returned, people who have never been here. Then it's something aboard your ship? He crawled backward a couple of steps. It's hard to explain why, but you don't have to be concerned about catching it. Karina and the others who are unwell are, well, they're different from the rest of us. Everyone else aboard the Bathsheba is fine. Bongo crawled closer. I'm glad only a few of your crew members are affected. How can I help you today? Xiao told him about the two purposes for their visit. Have you brought any samples for the staff at the treatment centre to test? We have. The pilot lifted the refrigerated box containing vials of bodily fluids and swabs from the patients. I hope you can find someone to help you. And I see you've brought the little girl back too. Maybe you'll be more successful this time. However, I can't be in two places at once. I can't take you to the medical centres and to arms dealers. Let me ask my cousin if she's free to help out. Whatever method of communicating the alien used, Bryce couldn't see. Bongo bounced gently 2 or 3 times, and then he seemed to be waiting. Bryce occupied the time by watching the crowds and surveying the myriad establishments lining the walkways around him. In reality, his mind was tens of thousands of kilometres away in the sick bay of a colony starship. A figure 2 heads taller than the tallest person in the surrounding throng came striding toward them. Skin softly scaled, hairless, her pupils vertical slits, she was otherwise vaguely human, though there was no telling what lay under her shirt, pants and boots. Ah, here she comes, said Bongo. That's your cousin? Asked Xiao, her jaw going slack. On one of my mother's side, far distant, and from a different planet, naturally. Bryce and Xiao exchanged a look. Scroocher, he hailed her as she neared them. Bongo! She leaned down to pat his head, which he didn't appear to mind. I'm about to show this young lady and her one-armed companion to several of our best hospitals. Would you accompany the remainder of the party to reputable starship weapons suppliers? My pleasure. Xiao handed the medical samples box to Jackson. "Scroocher," she muttered as they set off. "This place gets crazier by the minute." By the time they reached the Fifth Arms dealer, Bryce had begun to despair. What they were looking for seemed impossible to find. When they explained to Scroocher the weapon they had in mind, hoping she could narrow down the field of prospective suppliers for them, she leaned her head back. Was she thinking? Surprised? Comming bongo? Bryce had no idea. Her head returned to vertical. "I never heard of such a thing." "Oh, come on," said Shao. "A place like this? Best weapons technology in the sector? There has to be." "Wait here," said Scroocher. "I'll see what I can find."
"Where's she going?" Bryce asked Shao as the alien disappeared into the crowd. "I can't believe she can't look up whatever she wants on the local net."
"It is strange," Shao agreed, turning to Darius, who had quietly accompanied them on every failed attempt to secure the specialized weapon.
Bryce asked, "Scroocher is a good person, right? Can you tell?"
"Uh-huh. She's like a fizzy drink, sweet and bubbly." "A fizzy drink?" asked Shao, squinting after the departing alien. They had to wait half an hour for Scroocher to return, by which time they'd begun to wonder if she'd abandoned them. But then they spotted her scaly head weaving from side to side as she navigated the ever-present throng of visitors. When she arrived, she scrutinized them for a few seconds, as if making up her mind about something. "Will this be your last visit to Lakshmi, if you can find the weapon you desire?"
"Yes," Bryce quickly replied, before Shao could say anything to the contrary. If Jackson managed to find a medical center that could treat the mages, they might actually end up returning. But it appeared whatever Scroocher had to offer them was contingent on them never coming back. Darius looked up at him, frowning. Shit, the kid could tell when people were lying.
"Then follow me," said the
alien. Shao asked Bryce,
"Are you sure?"
"Absolutely. If we get what we want, why would we return?" Scroocher led the group to the other side of the concourse, and for the rest of the way they stayed close to the wall, passing the entrances to the many and varied facilities. Noise blared from some, odours from others, and some were dark and silent, though people entered and left just the same. When they arrived at the next stage of their journey, Bryce almost didn't see the exit point. Scroocher halted at an area of plain wall. Looking closer, however, it became clear a door stood there. Exactly the same colour and texture as the wall, it was almost invisible. Checking from side to side, the alien pushed it halfway open, creating a gap only just wide enough to slip through, and motioned everyone into it. Once they were all inside, she closed the door. It was only then the lights turned on in the passageway. Bryce was reminded of the security area he'd passed through when they'd arrived at the station. No decoration marked the walls, and there were only two options for movement, forward or back the way you came. Scroocher took them forward. Shao gave Bryce a worried look. He felt the same. They were clearly travelling into the less orthodox regions of Lakshmi. If it had been only him and Shao, he might only have felt more alert and wary, but he didn't like the idea of taking Darius with them. Ironically, this was even though the little mage was more capable than either of them of extracting himself from a dangerous situation, as he'd shown with the Marchonish men. Bryce had told him to bring his elixir as a precaution, hoping he wouldn't have to use it. They left the noise and bustle of the regular areas of the station far behind as they travelled the nondescript corridor. Apart from themselves, it was nearly empty. They saw only one other person, a small, slight man with a long beard. He fast walked past them. Neither he nor Scroocher acknowledged the other, as if pretending they hadn't seen them. Bryce counted 3 plain doors, the same as the one they'd entered by, lacking any sign or adornment, before the alien stopped at the 4th. Resting a hand on it, she said,
You never came here, you never met this person, and you didn't see anything."
"Okay," Bryce and Shao replied simultaneously.
"Okay,"
Darius solemnly echoed. Scrooge smiled and ruffled his hair. Then she opened the door.
Chapter 36. A bald, fat man sat at a low table. His legs barely fit beneath it, and his gut hung over the surface like a dessert pudding waiting to be sliced up and served. In each corner sat larger men with... Bryce did a double take. For the first time since entering the station, he saw weapons. The men were armed, pulse rifles held easily across their laps. As Bryce's gaze moved from the weapons to the men's eyes, one of them winked.
"Take a seat,"
said the fat man, sweeping a hand in the direction of low stools, standing between them and the table. They were even lower than the man's chair, designed to put clients at a psychological disadvantage, no doubt.
"Cute kid,"
he added as they sat. Shao shot Bryce a glance that expressed how he felt too. They were getting in far deeper than they'd intended. He wished Jackson were here. Even one-armed, the merc was better suited to this environment than he was, or, he suspected, Shao. She was a good pilot, but she rarely saw combat or had dealings with lowlifes. Scroocher hovered near the door, looking nervous.
"I hear you're in the market for a rather special space weapon,"
the man asked.
"Am I right?"
"Yes," Bryce replied.
"I'm... No names."
The man held up a hand in warning. Bryce continued,
"I'm here on behalf of a friend who can't make it, but we'll do our best to describe the weapon she wants."
"Before we discuss it," said Shao, "I should check with another member of our party. He's seeking out medical treatment, and if he's successful, it'll affect our budget."
"No comm here," the man said. "At least, not any you can access."
It was potentially a big problem. Unless they could speak to Jackson, they wouldn't know if he'd agreed to pay some of their funds in return for a cure for the mages or Nala. A new prosthetic arm wouldn't make a significant dent in their creds, but they had no idea how much they might have to pay for other treatments, which took priority over space armaments.
"Relax,"
said the man.
"We're just talking, right? We can discuss payment later, if I have what you want."
He poured a drink from a jug into 2 glasses and pushed them across the table before pouring another one for himself. The liquid was vivid purple and gave off a vapor. "Sudden death, right?" asked Shao. The man smiled.
"The lady knows her cocktails."
"Only take a sip," Shao murmured to Bryce. He did as she suggested. Just a taste of the drink was enough to make him feel as though he was losing grip on reality. He guessed whatever was in it could be absorbed through the membranes inside his mouth and throat. "What are you drinking?" Darius whispered, though in fact his voice must have been plain for everyone to hear. "Can I have some?" The man and his 2 goons laughed.
"No, sonny," said the arms dealer. "This isn't for you. I see you've brought your own drink. Have some of that if you're thirsty."
Darius looked warily up at Bryce. Bryce wasn't sure exactly what the look meant. Was Darius asking if he could drink some elixir to refresh himself? He didn't think so. He'd never seen any of the mages do that. Elixir didn't taste pleasant. You would have to be pretty dehydrated to consider drinking it not for its specific purpose. Was Darius asking him if it was okay to cast? He couldn't imagine why the boy would want to. As a precaution, he gave a slight shake of his head. The dealer focused on Bryce and Shao.
"Now we've oiled the wheels, let's get down to business."
Bryce described what they wanted. The dealer listened attentively. When Bryce reached the end of the description, he said,
"Tell me about your ship."
"Is that really necessary?" asked Shao. As they'd already discovered with the Marchonish men, the Bathsheba was a desirable prize. The last thing they should be doing was giving details about her to this shady character.
"It's necessary if you want me to supply a weapon to fit her," said the man. "Do you think space armaments are one size fits all? This is complex equipment we're talking about. Are you serious? Do you want to do business or not?"
"We're serious," Bryce assured him.
"Just cautious. I'm sure you understand."
He nodded.
"A little caution is wise. But in this world you've entered there must also be trust. I'm trusting you just by allowing you to speak to me. If there's no reciprocation, our talk is over."
"We don't want the talk to be over," said Bryce. Xiao said, "I'll tell you about our ship." She gave the dealer the rough specifications. "I can send the details later via an encrypted comm." He listened attentively, his gaze never leaving her face.
"I can see where your reluctance comes from, but you have nothing to fear from me. I have no need of a colony ship. There's no better place to be than Lakshmi, and I have more wealth than I can ever spend. I only dabble in semi-legal armaments for the thrill. When you can buy anything and everything you want, life loses its edge, if you know what I mean."
"Do you have the weapon we need?" Xiao asked brusquely.
"I think I do, but indulge me a little further. What you're asking for is extremely expensive, as I'm sure you can guess. Why not use all those creds to purchase a range of armaments? Placing all your bets on only one is foolish, and you two don't strike me as idiots."
"We have our reasons," said Bryce.
"Don't tell me you need those too."
The dealer held up his hands, palms outward.
"That's your concern. I'm just offering a little friendly advice, so—"
He turned to one of his men and nodded. The man got up and left the room by the rear door.
"It will take me some time to arrange transportation and a team to fit the device. We're looking at 48 hours minimum to remove the equipment from storage and run checks, and then another 3 or 4 days to ship and fit it, depending on what the team finds when they arrive at your vessel."
"A week?" asked Xiao. It seemed a long time to Bryce as well, but it was only to be expected considering the dimensions and complexity of the weapon.
"Roughly a week,"
the dealer confirmed.
"Give or take a day or two."
His man returned bearing a cred reader.
"We haven't talked about the price yet,"
said Bryce.
"I have a figure in mind."
"A firm figure?" asked Xiao. "We don't have unlimited funds, and, as I said, we aren't sure what else we might need to pay for."
"Reasonably firm. I can't lose money on the deal. Your other expenses are not my concern. I require 50% down payment before you leave this room, the balance to be paid upon installation and successful testing. I'm guessing there's no written contract," said Bryce. "If there were, you wouldn't be talking to me. You'd be out on the concourse somewhere, listening to a 100% legit dealer telling you they can't help you."
Bryce shared an anxious look with Xiao. If they agreed to the man's terms, they would be committing a large amount of their remaining money, possibly spending money already earmarked for medical treatment.
"What kind of figure are we talking about?"
asked Bryce. When the dealer answered, he and Xiao drew in a breath. It was nearly all the creds remaining in the account. "That's too much," Xiao blurted. "We can't afford—"
"Then you've wasted both our time,"
said the man, rising to his feet.
"Wait a moment,"
said Bryce.
"You said the amount isn't completely firm. Can you give us a discount? We have children aboard, who we're taking to find a new home."
He rested a hand on Darius's head. The boy peered up at him.
"Trying to appeal to my humanity?"
asked the dealer, sitting down.
"I'm too cynical and jaded for that, but I would like this deal to go ahead. It isn't every day I get to sell such a specialized weapon. I'll knock off 5%.
5%? Bryce did the mental calculation. Xiao sadly shook her head at him. It was still far too much. "It's too expensive," exclaimed Darius, no doubt picking up on Bryce and Xiao's anxiety. Everyone except those two laughed, Scroocher included. She had stayed by the door the entire time in silence.
"Is it, young man?" the dealer asked, smiling.
"I'm afraid it is," Xiao said. "It does look like we've wasted your time." Bryce was gutted. Karina's idea had been so good, but they didn't have a way of carrying it out. Not if they also wanted to find a cure for the Mage's awful disease and pay other medical expenses. The atmosphere in the room descended into mutual disappointment. The dealer stood up again and motioned to his men it was time to leave. "I'm thirsty," Darius announced as he unscrewed the lid of his elixir bottle. Bryce's eyes widened. "Darius," he cautioned, instantly aware of what the boy intended to do. "Very thirsty," he insisted, and took a swallow of elixir. "That's better." He closed his eyes. Darius's actions were so deliberate and odd. The arms dealer and his men stuck around to watch him. A few seconds was all it took for the cast to take effect. The dealer's eyes lost their focus.
"You know, maybe I was too hasty. Maybe I can give you a better deal. What do you say to a 50% discount?"
His men stared at each other, but neither intervened. Bryce underwent an internal struggle. Darius had created a situation with many pitfalls, yet they would never be able to carry out Karina's plan without the weapon.
"A 50% discount sounds great."
Chapter 37. It wasn't until after Scroocher had taken them to meet up with Jackson and Bongo and left them alone outside the treatment centre that Bryce could finally talk to Darius about his cast.
"What you did back there was kind, but not very smart."
The boy looked glum. "Sorry. What are you talking about?" Xiao objected. "He saved us a heck ton of money."
"For how long?"
Bryce asked. In response to the pilot's puzzled look, he went on,
"Karina told me about the cast Darius did. It has a time limit."
"Oh." Understanding began to dawn in Xiao's eyes. "How long does it last?"
"It depends on the mental sharpness of the victim. To me, that dealer seemed as sharp as they come. On the other hand, apparently Darius casts like a hurricane. I suppose that means the effects will last a long time."
"As long as a week?" asked Xiao.
"Maybe, but I doubt it."
Holy crap! Bryce knew how she felt. They'd tricked a dangerous, shady character into a deal that had most likely left him way out of pocket. At some point he would cease being enthralled and would wonder what the hell had happened to him. What he might do then was anyone's guess, but Bryce had a strong feeling no one aboard the Bathsheba was going to like it. "Is there any way we can back out?" Xiao mused.
"I don't see how. As I understand it, while he's under the effect of the cast, the dealer will feel compelled to help us, even if we refuse. Is that right, Darius?"
He nodded, looking even glummer.
Bryce continued, "We could ask Scroocher to take us back to try to cancel the agreement, but he's going to put up a fight. If he regains his normal mental state, while his workers are attaching a pricey piece of equipment entirely free of charge, he's going to be even madder."
"I was only trying to help," Darius said sadly.
"I know, but next time it would be better to ask before you cast, okay?"
Darius's shoulders slumped and he didn't reply. "Still," Xiao said, "if we can swing it so we can get the weapon without seriously pissing off the seller, that'd be a hell of a bargain."
"If," said Bryce.
She was right, but he couldn't think of a way to do it. There was going to be a reckoning sooner or later. The doors to the treatment centre opened and Bongo crawled out, followed by Nala and Jackson. Jackson with 2 arms.
"You got it done already?" Bryce asked.
"Yeah, but there's a small problem." 2 additional figures appeared 1 step behind him, armed guards.
"Did you order the weapon?"
asked Jackson.
"Yes, but
then we have to leave right away.
But
it's either that or we split up now. It's your call." Are you with this man?" One of the guards approached menacingly, his pulse rifle angled across his chest. "Why do you want to know?" asked Xiao.
"Move,"
the guard said, aiming his rifle at her.
"What the?"
"Do as they say," advised Jackson. "I'll explain when we get back to the Peregrine. Sorry, I had no idea this would happen. The doctors didn't tell me. They assumed I understood." What followed could only be described as a forced march through Lakshmi station. The visitors parted before them, gawping at the small party of humans and one spider-like alien being escorted like criminals through their midst.
"Did you find out what's wrong with the mages?"
Bryce asked Jackson softly.
"No."
Dread gripped his heart. "Not yet," Jackson hastily added. "I've left the samples with a centre that's offered to test for more obscure diseases." Bryce didn't think Karina would want to leave the mage's DNA in the hands of strangers. She probably wouldn't have agreed to sending the medical supplies to Lakshmi at all. But what was done was done. The Black Dog's doctors were out of ideas, and if no one found a cure for whatever was ailing their patients, there was almost certainly only one outcome.
"What about Nala? Any luck there?"
The merc heaved a heavy sigh.
"No."
His voice quietened to a whisper as he went on.
"I couldn't find anyone who could help her any better than our own medics, using therapeutic treatments. She'll have to live with the effects of hypoxia for the rest of her life."
Bryce looked at her. He loved the new Nala just as much as always. She'd continued to be his non-mage ally in the family. But he missed the nimble-witted girl she'd once been. The guards accompanied them all the way to the security zone, where Bongo said goodbye, and through the zone. They even waited at the station end of the umbilicus until they entered the Peregrine's airlock. The outer hatch closed and sealed, and the airlock pressurized. "What the hell was that about?" asked Xiao, removing her helmet.
"Wait until we get inside, and I'll show you."
When everyone had stripped off their EVA suits and was waiting expectantly in the Peregrine's passageway, Jackson pushed up the sleeve covering his new prosthetic. It looked extremely lifelike. Bryce hadn't studied the merc's arms in any detail, but he would have guessed the new device was virtually a mirror image of his flesh and bone one.
"It looks the same all the way up," Jackson said. "You can't tell where it joins my body."
Relief and pride shone from his face. Bryce hadn't realised how self-conscious the merc must have been about his old device.
"Cool, but why the big fuss at the station?"
Jackson raised his arm and bent his elbow, his fist pointed at the bulkhead. A rectangular section of his forearm split open, and a miniature gun rose up. "Shit!" Xiao exclaimed, taking a step backward. "You're permanently armed! Ha! Literally armed!" Jackson grinned.
"My humerus is basically a power pack. If it begins to run low, I can charge it up overnight while I sleep. So that's why we had to leave immediately," said Bryce.
"Visitors aren't allowed weapons anywhere on Lakshmi," Jackson confirmed. "Not even weapons contained in prosthetics." "Especially not contained in prosthetics, I bet," said Xiao. "No one can tell you're carrying."
"But they didn't explain before you had it fitted?" asked Bryce.
"They only asked me if I'd completed all my other business. I'd ordered the supplies Karina had on her list. They'll be delivered soon, and Bongo said he didn't know of any hospitals better than the ones we'd already visited.
so I reckoned I'd exhausted all our options regarding treatments for Nala and finding a cure for the mages. I told the doctors I'd done everything else I'd come here to do, and they took me in for surgery right away. It only lasted an hour. They said it was a standard operation they perform all the time, on account of the number of wounded military they see. Shao whistled.
You're a cyborg soldier. The gun retracted into Jackson's arm and the fake skin closed over it.
Stars, said Bryce. The surgeons told you it was a standard operation. That means they're turning the soldiers in the 3-system war into cyborgs too.
It figures, said Shao. Every operation they form is another stack of creds added to Lakshmi Station profits.
You can say that again, Jackson commented. My arm was pricey, but I figured it was okay because we didn't have any other medical expenses. How much was it? Asked Bryce. And how much did you pay for the supplies?
When Jackson told him, it only took a little simple arithmetic to realise they'd been right when they told the arms dealer they couldn't afford what he was asking.
How did you guys get on? Asked Jackson. You said you managed to buy the weapon. We did, but there's one small snag.
Chapter 38. Darius hated going to see Karina, but at the same time he couldn't help it. He needed to see her. She looked so sick, so pale and thin and unmoving. It hurt him deep inside. Parthenia looked the same. So did Fern, Oriana and Jace in the other rooms. It had been days since any of them had spoken. They slept most of the time, and when they were awake they mumbled and moaned and didn't make any sense. As if it wasn't enough to see them fading away from life, he could feel it too. In the past, before they were ill, he could have stood in complete darkness with any of them and known who he was with just by the pattern of their emotions. He'd known Parthenia, Fern and Oriana's ever since he was little, and he'd learned Jace and Karina's soon after he'd met them. But now their patterns were fading, like wallpaper exposed to sunlight for years. As soon as he returned from his trip to Lakshmi Station, he wanted to see Karina again. He passed through the empty main sickbay area and pushed open the door to her room. At the same time, another door opened and Dr. Asher appeared.
Darius, what are you doing?
I want to see Karina.
He couldn't look at the doctor. He had to look down and bite his lip to stop himself from crying. I'm afraid you... Dr. Asher paused. I don't suppose it will hurt. Go on in, but be careful not to disturb any of the tubes or wires, okay? His eldest sister looked even thinner than she had the last time he'd seen her, just before he went to Lakshmi. The bones of her face stuck out, and her eyes seemed to have sunk in under her eyelids. She was attached to 2 machines by wires, and tubes ran out from under her bedclothes. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of the medical equipment and Karina and Parthenia's raspy breathing. He sat down at Karina's side. One of her hands had a thin tube coming out of the back of it, but the other one was free. He held the free one. Though his sister was a fighter, her hands were small, not a lot bigger than his own.
Hey, Karina.
She didn't answer. She was fast asleep.
I came to tell you what happened at Lakshmi.
No one else had been in to see her as far as he knew, and he thought she would want to hear how the trip went.
Jackson got a new arm, and it's got a gun in it. It's awesome. I kinda wish I had one like it, but I like my real arms too, so maybe not.
He watched his sister, but she didn't react.
Nala? Nala's the same. Jackson tried to find someone to help her go back to how she was, but he couldn't.
He swallowed.
She's different now. I think she knows it too. I'm not sure she's happy about it. I think she wants to be how she was before, but that's not going to happen, right?
He paused.
I wish everything was how it was before.
He stared at Karina's limp fingers.
They got the space gun. Bryce and Shao, I mean. They met a man, a scary man. You know how Bongo looks like a spider? Well, this man, I don't know his name, he looked like a human on the outside, but he was a spider on the inside. Not a friendly spider like Bongo. He was the kind of spider that bites you in your sleep. So when you wake up in the morning, you don't know what that red mark is on your leg or why you feel sick. He was like that. But Bryce and Shao didn't know, and I couldn't tell them because the man was right there. And he had 2 guards with guns and...
He took a breath and screwed up his face.
I did something bad, Karina. I cast enthrall to make the man agree to the deal for the gun, but I shouldn't have, because when the cast wears off, the man will be really angry. And then what will he do? What will a man like that do to everyone?
He swallowed again, hard.
And it's all my fault, just like with Nala. I didn't transport us out of Deck 0 when I should have, and now she'll never be better. The Marchonish men were bullying her, and I took her away, but I had to cast in front of them. That was wrong too, but maybe none of it will matter. Maybe the man selling us the space weapon will do something bad when the enthrall cast fades, and nothing I've done will matter any more.
He bent his head over her hand, and hot tears dropped onto it.
What should I do?
But his sister couldn't answer him. She'd slept all the time he was talking. Would she ever wake up? No one had told him what was going to happen to her and the other mages. All he knew was the doctors at Lakshmi couldn't figure out what was wrong with them. They were going to do more tests, but Bryce didn't seem to think they would find anything. Bryce's pattern of feelings had changed, but it hadn't faded like the mages'. It had grown darker and heavier. His face didn't match how he really felt. He looked normal most of the time, but his fear and sadness was an iron weight always dragging on him. Darius rested his head on the bed next to Karina's hand. If she and the other mages died, he would be the only one left. He didn't want that. He didn't want to be the only mage. He didn't like being different from everyone else. They all treated him a little bit differently. He could feel a thread of wariness. They knew he could do things they couldn't, that if he really wanted to hurt them, then he could, very easily. Even Bryce treated him differently. He wasn't the same with him as he was with Nala. If he was the only mage, he would feel very alone. He looked up at his sister's sleeping face. If only she could help him. She'd always helped him in the past. If she couldn't help him, he wanted to hear her voice at least. Just a few words to give him comfort. But she was far away, and she was journeying farther still. A ship-wide alert had gone out. Darius was missing again. Bryce couldn't rid himself of the gut-wrenching feeling that another disaster had occurred. Only this time it was Darius who would be the victim. Nala was safe here on the Bathsheba's bridge, but Darius had slipped away without anyone noticing.
"I'm sure he's fine," said Shao. "He's just wandered off and got distracted by something."
"Then why isn't he answering his comm?" Shao didn't reply. "The Marchonish men are on the ship. We have to watch the kids. We have to know where they are at all times. How did he manage to get out of here without any of us noticing?" Shao had come to relieve Bibic at the Bathsheba's flight controls.
They had to maneuver to the rendezvous point with the arm dealer's vessel. Jackson and Justice were on the bridge too. Justice had come to find out what had happened on Lakshmi. At some time during the general chatter, Darius had left. It could have been as long as 20 minutes ago. Bryce's comm chirruped. As he checked who it was, he felt the blood drain from his face. Dr. Asher. "What's wrong?" asked Xiao. "Aren't you going to answer it?" Ever since leaving to go to Lakshmi station, Bryce had been dreading Asher contacting him. He had visited Karina to say goodbye, even though she was permanently unconscious now. She had looked sicker than ever. She was slipping away from him, and there wasn't anything he could do about it. If Dr. Asher had something to tell him, it could only be bad news, possibly the worst news he would ever hear. He accepted the comm. "Yes?" "Darius is here in sickbay." Relief hit him so hard he almost collapsed. Asher continued. "He went into Carina and Parthenia's room 10 minutes ago. When I heard the alert, I checked and he's still there. He's asleep on Karina's bed." "Thank the stars. You're sure he's all right?" "It depends how you define it. Considering everything the poor child has been through, he's far from all right. But physically he's fine. Just very tired, I imagine. Do you want me to wake him up?" "No, I'll come over there and carry him to his suite." Chapter 39. The men from Marchon had been making themselves at home, excessively so in Bryce's opinion. In the week since they'd come aboard, no one had caught sight of a single Marchonish woman, but the men ranged far and wide across the ship, showing their faces in all the areas the black dogs frequented, and acting like the place was their own. The mercs had kept their cool. No one had confronted the newcomers about their behaviour yet, but tensions were simmering. It would only be a matter of time before they boiled over. But today the focus of Bryce's attention had to be elsewhere. The arms dealer from Lakshmi station had contacted them to say he was on his way with the weapon, accompanied by the technicians and engineers who would fit it to the ship and integrate it with her systems. The work was already behind schedule. The dealer had implied the weapon would arrive earlier, and the delay had caused Bryce to assume the enthrall cast had worn off days ago. He'd thought the man had come to his senses, realised he'd been duped, and pocketed the deposit they'd handed over. In the circumstances it wouldn't have been a bad outcome, though it would have meant that part of Karina's plan would be unfulfilled. Now it seemed the deal was going ahead. Bryce wasn't sure what to think. Was the arms dealer still enthralled? Or was he no longer experiencing the effects of the cast and was coming to get his revenge? They would soon find out. In the days since departing Lakshmi, they'd discussed how to fix the problem Darius's cast had created, but they'd been unable to come up with a plan. Bryce waited with Xiao and Van Hasty at the airlock, ready to greet their visitors. Darius and Nala were confined to quarters, under express orders to not leave for the duration of the weapon-fitting process. Uncle Jackson and a rotating team of mercs were their protection from the Lakshmi stationites and Marchonish men. The temptation to have Darius on hand to cast them out of potential trouble from the arms dealer had been strong, but Bryce had decided against it. The boy's powers had worked against them recently. He couldn't risk any more problems. Also, it was clear to anyone who knew Darius even a little bit that the boy was in a terrible mental state. It wouldn't be fair to place any more burdens on him. He needed nurturing, not responsibilities. Though Bryce felt inadequate in that regard, there was only one person who could heal Darius, and not by a cast but by her overwhelming love for him. By some miracle, Karina and the other mages continued to cling to life. though how much longer they would last was unclear. The medical samples left at Lakshmi station had yielded no results. The doctors there were just as confused by the Mage's disease as were Asher and Baxter. When the seemingly inevitable happened, Bryce feared it would break the boy. The arms dealer stepped from the airlock. His ship's hatches were compatible with the Bathsheba's, so he hadn't arrived via umbilicus wearing an Eva suit. Bryce guessed his vessel was an ancient model like the Marchonish men's, only the dealers would be refurbished and brought up to date, cherished in the way some people loved old autocar models. A cursory scan had told them the vessel was, nevertheless, bristling with armaments. The dealer was better dressed than the last time Bryce had seen him. He wore a suit tailored to hide his belly and a wig of thick golden hair to cover his bald pate. Bryce thought he saw traces of makeup on his eyes and lips too. A man and a woman, similarly formally dressed, flanked him. Bryce looked more closely at the dealer's eyes. From the hazy, slightly unfocused look, he appeared to remain enthralled. The length of time Darius's cast had held was remarkable.
"Welcome aboard," said Bryce. "Members of my team are moving into place on the exterior of the ship. We will also need access to your existing weapons systems, engines, and bow infrastructure. My team leaders will organize the fitting from here."
He didn't mention his companions' names.
"Shao and I can show you to the bridge. Does someone need to go to the bow section?"
"Me," said the woman, raising her hand. Van Hasty departed with her.
"How long will the process take?"
asked Bryce, as he set off with the dealer and Shao.
"Barring any hiccups, about 5 hours. But there are always hiccups."
"As little as that?" asked Shao. "I thought you said it would take days."
"We made some adjustments before setting out. That was the cause of our delay. I thought it would be better to spend as little time out here and away from the station as possible."
"Why's that?" Shao probed. "If you don't mind me asking." Bryce too wondered why the man was avoiding spending time on the Bathsheba.
"Haven't you heard? The Three Systems war is heating up. Gugong has swapped sides and is now allying with Marchon. There are rumours a massive attack on the Quinton space fleet is planned. Interstellar space is big, but I'd rather be safe on Lakshmi if and when it kicks off. The speed and firepower of each side's battleships has increased exponentially over the decades, thanks to developers and suppliers like me. The risk is small, but I don't want to become collateral damage."
Bryce had to bite his tongue to avoid giving an angry response. The dealer didn't mind other folk being damaged by his business. Shao looked sour too.
"What are your plans after we finish our work here?"
the dealer asked.
"Are you leaving the system immediately?"
"We don't have a reason to stick around," Bryce lied.
"A wise move. Where's the young boy you had with you before?"
"He's playing in his cabin."
"Huh. Sweet kid. I never had any of my own, but there's still time."
How many tens of thousands of children had the man's business made orphans? They walked onto the bridge. Bibic moved to rise from his seat, but Shao gestured at him to stay put. She took the male team leader to a weapons console and sat down with him. While the pilot was guiding him through the Bathsheba's systems, it was up to Bryce to keep the dealer occupied and to pray the effects of Darius's cast would last until the work was completed and the people from Lakshmi were far, far away.
"How old is the ship?"
asked the dealer.
"I don't recognize the model."
Bryce wasn't sure how much it was safe to tell him.
"We don't actually know. She seems to have had several owners before us. The database was originally in another language, not universal." "That old, huh? I thought so. She's held up pretty well, from what I can tell."
"We've had a few problems, but she hasn't killed anyone yet." "Not quite."
"They don't build them like they used to, not since the colonization period." Nowadays, battleships are where the money's at. People aren't interested in settling new worlds. Our ancestors found new homes and settled down. Even now, thousands of years later, most populations haven't exploited the full potential of their planets. There's no pressure to move on, you know. Not like there used to be in the old days.
Bryce thought of the group from Marchon, desperate to escape the home their ancestors had created.
"Can I get you a drink?"
he asked, dying to effect an escape of his own.
"I can probably program the printer to create any cocktail you want. I appreciate the offer, but I never touch a drop of alcohol until the job is done and the equipment has passed all the tests. It's a little superstition of mine."
Shame. If he could have got the man off his face, they wouldn't need to worry about... It happened. The dealer blinked and his pupils contracted, as if bringing everything around him into sharp focus. Darius's cast had finally run its course.
"What was I saying?"
he asked uncertainly.
"You were telling me about your superstition,"
Bryce answered, clinging to a tenuous hope that if he carried on as normal, the dealer might follow his lead. He might not recall he'd sold his highly expensive space weapon at a huge discount, for no reason whatsoever.
"Yeah, that was it. I never..."
He squinted at his team leader, where he was hunched over the console. Murmuring could be heard as the man liaised with workers outside the Bathsheba.
"How about I give you a tour of the ship?"
Bryce asked brightly.
"You said you don't know this model. You might find it interesting." The
dealer ran a hand through the golden mop on his head, which didn't budge a millimetre. The wig had to be cemented on, or perhaps it was real hair, grown within days by a body modification clinic.
"I think I would. She's old, but a beauty, and unique as far as I know. You're lucky to have her."
The man really was a connoisseur of ancient spacecraft. No one else would have called the Bathsheba beautiful. Shao looked over her shoulder as the dealer and Bryce got to their feet. Apparently noticing the panic on her friend's features, her mouth opened to an O. Her jaw snapped shut. She pointed at the team leader's back and gave a thumbs up. She would keep the man distracted and cut off from the arms dealer for as long as necessary, or rather, for as long as she could. Bryce escorted the dealer from the bridge. Chapter 40. Thanking the galactic gods, the Bathsheba was a vast ship that took hours to tour. Bryce guided the arms dealer to the top deck and twilight dome. Not only was it far from the bridge and the bow where his team leaders were working, it was usually fairly empty. Except as he stepped inside, he remembered it was one of the areas the Marchonish men had taken for their own. They weren't blatant about their territory-claiming efforts, yet. They used more subtle methods, such as turning silent whenever someone not belonging to their group entered their midst, or pointedly commandeering all the available seats. It was dumb of them to antagonize the very people who had agreed to help them out of a tough spot, especially before the journey had even begun. But the men had been made arrogant by their culture. They clearly saw anyone who was either female or not from Marchon as stupid and inferior. Not that the black dogs took any notice. They knew exactly what the newcomers were attempting, and they would have none of it. All silences were ignored, and if there was nowhere to sit down, they would fetch more chairs from somewhere else. In the Twilight Dome, no struggle for dominance was going on. The place was filled with Marchonish. They'd discovered the stored drinks behind the bars, and a party was in full swing. Bryce hesitated at the door. Would this be a good or a bad venue to draw someone's attention from the fact they were in the process of losing a huge amount of money? The arms dealer liked to drink. Perhaps he could persuade him to break his superstition. It was the ideal spot. The dealer was gazing up at the partially filled-in transparent dome.
That must have looked great when it was whole. What happened?
There was nothing to be gained in telling him about Mezban and her bomb, or the Regians.
A blowout. The structure must have weakened over the years. Yeah?
The dealer peered upward, his apparently knowledgeable gaze travelling the struts between the overhead sections.
Are you sure I can't interest you in a cocktail? What was it you said when we met? Something to oil the wheels.
The Marchonish men were staring at them. Their tactical silence had fallen. The dealer frowned.
Who are those guys? And what's their problem? Just some passengers we'll be taking with us when we leave. I don't like the look of them. If you take my advice, you'll leave them behind, or drop them off at the first asteroid you see. Your advice is duly noted. Now, how about that cocktail? It's going to be hours before your team is finished. My team that's fitting your... We found some ancient drink recipes in the ship's database. Unusual combinations you would never normally consider. But when you taste them, they're rather special. No kidding. Well,
I'll mix you something. You don't have to drink it, only try a sip. Without waiting for a reply, Bryce strode to the nearest bar. A surly man leaned on it. He lifted a lip before asking,
"What do you want?"
"Get out of my way," Bryce hissed, shouldering the man aside.
"Hey!"
His companions grumbled and edged closer. Bryce took no notice of them as he hastily splashed random liquors into a glass and finished the drink off with a squirt of soda. He'd never made a cocktail in his life. His concoction probably tasted disgusting, but he hoped to get the dealer drunk as quickly as possible. If the man's stomach didn't immediately press eject when the drink hit it, this recipe should have the desired effect. When he took it over, the dealer accepted it graciously, saying,
"Just a sip, mind. Otherwise it's bad luck."
He lifted the glass to his lips and took somewhat more than a sip. Instantly his eyes widened until the whites showed all around the irises. His face turned red.
"That's..."
he spluttered.
"That's pretty good." "It is. I might indulge myself a little further."
He took a second drink and swirled the liquid around his mouth before swallowing it. He smacked his lips. After smiling like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, he slurped some more.
"My, you must tell me what's in it."
It's Bryce racked his brains. He didn't know the ingredients. He hadn't read the labels on the bottles.
"It's a secret family recipe, I'm afraid. I really can't tell you."
The dealer waggled a finger at him.
"There's no need to be mysterious. I won't tell anyone. And you're leaving the system soon, right?"
He drained the dregs of the drink.
"I'm sorry. If I told you, I would bring the family curse down on you, and who knows what might happen."
The dealer considered this response for a second before shrugging.
"Oh well, if this is gonna be my only opportunity to enjoy your wonderful cocktail, you'd better make me another."
"Shit."
"Sure."
Bryce took the man's empty glass and set off toward the bar again. What had he used to make the drink? He definitely couldn't remember. He'd created the chance to render the dealer so drunk he would allow the deal to go ahead, only to fumble it.
"Remind me,"
said a voice directly behind him. Bryce jumped in shock. The dealer had followed him.
"How much are you paying to complete your purchase today?"
Despite the alcohol circulating in his system, the man's gaze was clear and hard.
"I'm not sure exactly. Let me get you that cocktail, then I'll look it up." "No more drinks. Look up that figure right now."
"No problem. Come with me." The Marchonish men watched with interest as he and the dealer walked to the door. Bryce's mind was in turmoil. The dealer had clearly realised something was wrong. What would he do when he confirmed he'd been tricked? His battleship was easily a match for the Bathsheba's old, outdated weaponry, and he had a large team of workers, probably armed. The doors to the Twilight Dome closed, shutting out the curious looks of the newcomers. The passageway stretched out left and right. What should he do? It would be hours before the dealer's team finished fitting the weapon. He couldn't possibly put off revealing the deal was a sham for that long. What would happen then? At the very least, they would lose the weapon they wanted and needed. At worst, they would lose the ship and their lives. They were passing Jace's cabin. On impulse, Bryce slapped the security panel and the door opened. He'd had access to Jace's suite ever since he'd fallen sick. Before he'd lost consciousness, he would occasionally ask Bryce to fetch his personal items.
"What are you doing?" asked the dealer. "What's in there?"
"We can access the computer via the interface here. It'll save us time." The dealer blinked and leaned in. The lights came on, revealing a very ordinary cabin. Bryce's chest ached at the sight of small reminders of his friend, like the empty jug and beakers from which Jace would drink char.
"If you're sure."
The dealer stepped over the threshold. Bryce was one step behind. As soon as they were both inside, he closed the door. The dealer asked,
"Where's the interface?"
Bryce's punch knocked him out cold. He snatched the comm button from the fallen man and searched him for weapons, relieving him of a gun in a shoulder holster before dragging him into the inner bedroom. He closed the door and locked it, and then returned to the passageway and locked the outer door too. Finally, he went into the suite's connections via the security panel and cut off its access to the ship's comm system. No one would hear the dealer's hollers or banging. The black dogs wouldn't have a problem ignoring him. The newcomer's involvement would only complicate everything. The unenthralled dealer was safely out of the way for now. What to do with him next was a question for which Bryce had no answer. Karina hadn't included a duped, outraged, very dangerous man in her plan. Chapter 41. When Bryce returned to the bridge, he found a holo on display, and Xiao and the team leader were watching it. "The battle's started!" Xiao exclaimed. Streaks of light were speeding across space as the ships fired their pulse cannon. Long beams, particle lances, flashed out, carving into their targets. Tiny flecks representing fighter ships spewed from the bellies of larger craft, spread out and turned in unison, like a shoal of killer fish scenting prey. The happenstance of the space battle was a welcome complication. It would serve as another distraction to the arms dealer's team, and hopefully it would encourage them to work fast, so they could return to the safety of their station as soon as possible.
"How are you doing?"
Bryce asked the team leader. The man returned his attention to his console.
"I'm waiting for the engineers to give me the go-ahead to begin synchronization. From what I've seen, it shouldn't be a problem."
He added,
"I'm Churtang, by the way. I don't hold with all that anonymity nonsense. It's not like you're going to implicate yourselves by giving us up to station security, is it? So the weapon is actually illegal?"
"Oh yeah,
about as illegal as they come, according to the current legislation on intersystem warfare. But my boss likes to stay ahead of the curve, developing new weapons ready for when they become legal."
"But what if they never become legal?" Xiao asked.
"They always do. That's the way things have gone for the history of the war. The latest tech is one step ahead of the lawmakers, but the law catches up eventually." "Whoa, did you see that?"
Bryce checked the holo. A battleship had been cut clean in two. The halves were floating apart. Inside, rapid depressurization would be wreaking havoc. hurling crew into space, sucking them through hull breaches, slamming equipment into them. All personnel would be wearing EVA suits as a precaution against such an eventuality, and section hatches would seal, but the loss of life would be massive. Chertang stared, transfixed. Bryce caught Xiao's worried look. She had to be wondering what had happened to the dealer, but he had no way of telling her. Neither of them could mention the missing man without reminding Chertang of his existence. Then, right on cue, he turned from the horrific scene and asked, "Where's my boss gone?" "I left him in the lounge, relaxing," Bryce answered lamely. "Relaxing?" Xiao echoed, her eyebrows lifting, as if to say, "You couldn't think of anything better than that." "No problem," said Chertang. "I need to check something with him." He tried to use his comm button to speak to the dealer, but predictably received no response. "That's odd." "A malfunction, maybe," Xiao suggested. "If it is, it's for the first time. We don't screw up stuff like that." "Then he must have mislaid his button." "That's more likely. I'll have to go and speak to him face to face. Where is he?" "In one of our lounges," Bryce replied. "Really far from here. I'll go and get him for you." "No, don't do that," said Chertang, alarmed. "He would hate the idea I was summoning him. I have to go to him." "Well, I'm not sure where I left him." "You're not sure?" Xiao's eyebrows rose higher. "I'll go and find him." Bryce strode toward the door. "No, Chertang's focus switched to the console. "Great, an update." Bryce slipped out quickly. He jogged down the passageway, trying to get out of sight before Chertang finished reading the message. Xiao could make up an excuse about not being allowed to leave the bridge and tell the team leader he had to stay there too, for security reasons. She would think of something. Hours of the weapon installation process remained. They had to keep the workers from discovering the disappearance of their boss until then. After that, Bryce had no idea. But one thing he did know was he had to apprise Van Hasty of the situation. She was in the bow with the other team leader, who they also had to prevent from trying to contact her boss. He didn't want to risk a conversation with Van Hasty the woman might overhear, and he had to do something while avoiding the bridge and awkward questions from Chertang. He took a turn and headed forward. The first people he encountered as he arrived, panting at the bow, were Marchonish men. Were these the same ones he'd seen in the Twilight Dome, drawn by the new activity on the ship? Or were these different? They seemed to get everywhere they weren't wanted, hanging about like a bad smell. They drew aside as Bryce approached. He saw someone he hadn't seen for days, Porcher. The Marchonish leader had put on weight in his short time on the ship. A bulging stomach seemed to be a feature of leaders in the region. "Just the man I want to see," said Porcher. "Oh," Bryce replied, slowing to a walk. "I'm busy right now." He carried on past Porcher, but the man followed him. "Something's going on we weren't informed about. What is it? An adaptation to the ship?" Bryce ignored him, scanning between the clustered bodies for Van Hasty. "It's just, if you're doing something to the Bathsheba, we should have been consulted, as per our agreement." This comment drew Bryce to a halt. He faced the man. "What agreement?" Entirely without shame, Porcher replied, "Our partnership in the running of the ship." Bryce said darkly, "That isn't an agreement I remember. There is no partnership. We allowed you to join us, that's all." "I don't recall the exact words, but it stands to reason we're an equal party in the venture, considering there are more of us than you." "Your numbers don't mean anything, unless we're talking about the extra mouths to feed while you're out of deep sleep, or the additional chemicals we'll need for the chambers. In fact, stacked up against the colony ship the Black Dogs own, your numbers mean a whole lot of nothing." Bryce fixed the man with a stare, his hands on his hips. Porcher's men were reacting badly to the conversation, their grumbles growing louder. Porcher held Bryce's gaze for a minute, but eventually looked away, shrugged and smiled. "There will be plenty of time for negotiations after we set out. As a goodwill gesture, we'll agree to whatever it is you guys are having done to the ship this time. In the future, we'd appreciate some consultation." Not dignifying this bullshit with a response, Bryce forced his way through the men who had gathered around them. 50 meters farther on, he found Van Hasty. She was alone, standing next to an open maintenance access hatch, her rifle slung across her back. "Are those assholes still hanging around back there?" "Yeah." There was no need for any explanation of which assholes she meant. "Damn it, I can't get them to leave us alone. They don't take any notice of what I say. Half the time they pretend they can't hear me." "Have they been interfering in the installation?" "Not yet. The engineer's somewhere in there." She nodded at the open hatch. "I haven't seen her for half an hour." Bryce brought her up to date on everything, finishing with, "So the longer that woman's in a tunnel and not asking where her boss has gone, the better." "I'll keep her occupied as long as I can, but don't you think it's time we got things moving?" "What, now? That isn't what we planned." "I know, but we didn't plan on locking up a furious arms dealer either. We need to improvise." Bryce considered for a moment. "You're right. I forgot to tell you the space battle our dealer was worried about has started." "It has? That could work to our advantage. I'll com Jackson and tell him to get the ball rolling." "And I'll message Shao and tell her to start building power for the test." Chapter 42. Porcher wasn't difficult to find among his buddies. He was holding court. A bunch of men surrounded him, listening to him spouting off about changes needed aboard the ship. Bryce asked the man standing between him and the Marchonish leader to step aside. When he sneered and refused, Bryce took out his gun and pressed the muzzle into his chest. The man's eyes popped and he backed away, hands raised. Porcher noticed the commotion. "Hey, what are you?" Bryce advanced, aiming at him. "It's time you and your men returned to your ship." "Why?" Porcher shot a narrow-eyed glance at his supporters, as if to say, "It's happening. You know what to do." "The deal's off," said Bryce. "Move." "Now wait a minute. Let's talk this out, like men." "I don't see you moving. You have 5 seconds." "This isn't fair. You said 4, 3. Okay, that's enough. You asked for this." There was a flurry of movement. 2 men grabbed Bryce from behind. His gun was wrested from his hand. "I never liked you," sneered Porcher, as one of the men handed him Bryce's weapon. "Jumped up teenager, barely out of short pants. It's going to give me great pleasure to..." Jackson appeared behind him, suited up. Porcher jerked forward as something was thrust into his back. "What?" Jackson asked. "I'm dying to hear what's going to give you great pleasure. Don't let me stop you." Porcher grimaced. "Let's not be hasty. I wasn't really going to hurt the kid." "Back off!" a Marchonish man yelled, pulling a gun from the back of his pants. "Let him go!" They weren't supposed to carry arms on the ship. It was one of the conditions of their presence. Not that the mercs had taken them at their word. They were frisked before being allowed aboard. But clearly someone had slipped up. Either that or they'd managed to break into one of the armories. Another man darted forward to snatch Bryce's weapon from Porcher. "Yeah, let him go." The men edged in, closing the space around Bryce, Porcher and Jackson. "Kill them both," someone urged. "Then we take over the ship." "Nah-uh," said a voice from somewhere at the back. "That ain't happening." Van Hasty had come up. "It's the bitch!" a man called out. A pulse round hissed. Van Hasty was taking the initiative. The bunched-up men broke in a confused wave. Some were heading toward Van Hasty and some were running from her. Bryce was buffeted hard. Something heavy landed at his feet. The Marchonish leader, a smoking hole in his back. "He killed Porcher!" Jackson shot the man aiming at him next. At the same time, Bryce ran at the other armed man and knocked him off his feet. He grabbed his gun. When the man wouldn't let go, he kicked him in the head. "Where's Van Hasty?" he gasped, rising with his weapon back in his hands. Another tide was passing them. The black dogs accompanying Jackson had arrived. They crashed into the Marchonish men. The fight was brief. Any of the newcomers who didn't surrender immediately were executed on the spot. Most of them weren't dumb enough to put up a fight. As the struggle died down, only 6 or 7 bodies lay on the deck. The black dogs led the men from Marchon away. Their heads hung low as reality caught up with them. Van Hasty brought up the rear, her rifle at her shoulder. When she reached Bryce and Jackson, she halted, gazing down at Porcher's corpse. "Damn, I wanted to kill him." "You don't get everything you want," said Jackson. "Ain't that the truth? Where to now?" "A lot of them are in the Twilight Dome," Bryce replied. "But don't you have to wait here for the engineer?" "Nah. Yeah, probably. But the longer she wanders around trying to find someone to talk to, the better, right?" As they passed Jace's cabin, Bryce listened for sounds of the imprisoned arms dealer. No shouts or banging could be heard. Either he'd given up, or Bryce's guess at the soundproofing afforded by 2 doors and a room in between was correct. 15 black dogs had already arrived at the dome, as requested by Jackson, and were waiting outside. "This should be fairly easy," Jackson told them. "Aw, don't say that," Van Hasty protested. "You'll jinx it." "We only want them back on their ship," Jackson went on. "But they don't get 2 chances to argue about it." He opened the doors. A pulse round hit his breastplate, scorching it, though it must have been fired at some distance because it didn't seem to hurt him. The black dogs had retreated to each side of the open doorway, out of the line of sight of anyone in the room. "Damn it, Jackson," said Van Hasty. "What did I say about jinxing it?" The Marchonish men had overturned the tables and chairs and used them to build a barricade. Word had reached them about their forced evacuation. "Come out with your hands raised," Jackson called out. "You know there's only one way this can end." "We're not going back to Marchon." "You're leaving the Bathsheba," said Jackson. "Dead or alive. Whichever doesn't matter to us." "Speak for yourself. I don't want to scrape their bloody carcasses off the deck." "We would rather die here, like men." "Sure," Jackson replied. "Have it your way. You're pretty dumb men, if I'm honest. But if that's what you want." He nodded at the black dogs. They piled into the room, rifles blazing. Through the flash of rounds, some tentative hands rose beyond the barricade. A pulse hit one, turning it into a macabre torch. The hand disappeared, its owner screaming. Figures were moving in the shadowy room, running, darting into the corners. Bryce had a feeling the man who had asserted the group's death wish hadn't been speaking for all of them. "They're giving up. They're surrendering." The furniture was already ablaze. Fire-suppressing foam spurted from overhead. The mercs gradually ceased firing. Some men lay on the floor, groaning. Others peeked out from their hiding places. "We'll go peacefully. Just don't shoot." "Shit," Van Hasty muttered, surveying the smoking, charred scene. "What a mess." While the 2 largest groups of Marchonish men were being rounded up, black dogs had been roaming the ship, finding the rest of the individuals and giving them their marching orders. Despite their swagger, when it came down to it, the men generally did exactly what they were told. though perhaps that wasn't so surprising, considering the proximity of rifle muzzles to their faces. When the black dogs were confident all their unwelcome visitors had returned to their own vessel, they prepared to disable her engine. The group would be stranded in space, but they would leave them with working comms. Someone would come to their rescue eventually. Then they could tell whoever they liked about the kid on the colony vessel who could disappear at will. The Bathsheba would be long gone. Jackson, Van Hasty, and 2 Merc engineers stood at the airlock, along with a plentiful guard in case the Marchonish men put up a fight. "Right," said Van Hasty. "So after we kill their engine, that's when we get the women." "We what?" asked Jackson. "Are you deaf? We get the women. We can't leave them with those pricks." "We never discussed this." "We never discussed it because it's obvious." "Not to me." "What?" "How do you know they want to join us?" Jackson challenged. "No one's even seen one, let alone talk to any of them." "Of course they want to join us. What's wrong with you? Haven't you lived alongside the evolutionary throwbacks controlling them for the past week? And you're so much better, deciding for yourself what these women want?" Van Hasty frowned at him. "After we kill their engine, we get the women." Chapter 43. While the expulsion of the Marchonish men had been going on, Bryce had suited up. He decided to accompany the black dogs into the Marchonish ship, driven by curiosity as much as anything. No one from the Bathsheba had boarded her until now. He wanted to see the other half of Marchonish society the men kept so secluded. The vanguard of mercs stepped from the airlock onto the foreign vessel. "What do you want?" a voice called out. The man kept himself out of sight. "We did what you asked. We left your ship. Now leave us alone," Jackson replied. "We have a couple more jobs to finish before we're done." "What are you going to do? Porcher's dead, and so are 7 others. We've paid our dues. Let us go." "When we finished our business." The mercs were advancing into the ship. Bryce was part of the rear guard, walking backward. In here, their enemy had access to weapons. The black dogs could meet some foolhardy resistance from men whose arrogance sometimes overrode their common sense. The mercs pushed forward. Van Hasty was on point. "Bring out your women. We have a proposition for them." "Ha!" the mystery man replied. "I bet you do. So that's why you're here. You want to steal them. We should have guessed. That's why you forced us off your ship. You never wanted us. You only ever wanted our females." "This is the engine room," said Carter via helmet comm. "Blake, Rees, with me." 3 figures split off and disappeared. The rest of the mercs halted. "We want to speak to the women," said Van Hasty. "Like hell. You want them, you come and get them." "Leave it, Van Hasty," Jackson said via comm. "It's not worth the risk." "No, damn it. I'm not leaving until I've talked to them." "Maybe they don't have any women," a merc joked. "Maybe they only exist in the men's imaginations." "I had a girlfriend like that once," said someone else. "Best woman I ever had. Never complained about anything." "Quit kidding around," Van Hasty snapped. "You're doing a goddamn public service here." "Get out," said the invisible Marchonish man. "You're not having our women, and that's the end of it." A tense pause stretched out. "Van Hasty," said Jackson, "unless you want to search every corner of this ship, with hostiles at every turn." "Wait," she said, before switching to external comm. "I get it. You know they'll leave you in a heartbeat when they see the alternative. You know you don't stand a chance against real men." "You said it, Van Hasty," someone commented. "Shut up, idiot. That isn't true," the voice yelled. "Bitch, you're just trying to manipulate us." "If it isn't true, prove it." Silence. There were sounds of movement and muffled arguments. Bryce had been watching the empty passageway that led back to the airlock. He risked a look over his shoulder, past the black dogs to the passageway ahead. He was just in time to see the first woman appear. He drew in a breath. She was heavily pregnant, her swollen belly pressing against the thin fabric of her dress. Aside from her stomach, she was painfully thin. Her eyes were wide and frightened above her jutting cheekbones, and her long hair was an unkempt mess. The mercs moved uneasily. Van Hasty's enforced rescue mission was no longer such a joke. More women stepped into view. They differed in stature and colouring, but in their half-starved, fearful state they were alike. Bryce quickly counted them before he had to look aft again. There were about 20. Were there more who hadn't come forward? How many had been held back? They would probably never know. "Fuck," Van Hasty whispered. Then, over external comms, she said, "We're inviting you to come with us aboard the Bathsheba. We can't promise you anything much except food, your own space, and whatever else you might need. We're travelling out of this system, destination undecided. You're welcome to join us, but there'll be no going back, and you have to decide now, this minute." Bryce's attention was inexorably drawn to the spectacle playing out behind him. The pregnant woman's eyes shifted to the side, as if conscious of being watched. "You don't have anything to fear," said Van Hasty softly. "We'll protect you." The woman took a step forward. "Ava!" someone yelled. "Don't you dare!" She froze. "It's okay." Van Hasty hoisted her rifle to her shoulder. The woman took another step. The mercs moved aside so Ava could pass between them. "Get back here!" a man shouted. "You're not taking my kid!" He darted into sight. Van Hasty fired and he fell. The women screamed and ducked. Some ran toward the mercs, others sped away. More men appeared, firing. The mercs shot back. Bryce whirled to face the rear. Marchonish men were heading up the passageway. He began shooting. "Fall back!" Jackson hollered. "Back to the ship! Carter, Rees, Blake, where are you?" "Coming," Carter replied. "The engine's dead." Bryce was pouring round after round into the men blocking their escape. Their enemy was in armour, but the barrage began to take its toll. But Bryce's suit was heating up too. He marched steadily forward, forcing a passage to the airlock. Someone stepped right in front of him, one of the Marchonish women, panicking in terror. He thrust her behind. The airlock appeared. The hatch remained open. Perhaps the Marchonish men had some brains after all. Bryce ran for the airlock and lay down cover up one side of the passageway while his partner covered the other. The rest of the mercs and the Marchonish men raced through the hatch. Bryce counted the women. 5. Only 5 out of the 20 or so he'd seen. 5 out of all the women on the ship had managed to get out. Van Hasty was last to enter the airlock. The passageway was empty. Chapter 44. Bryce burst onto the bridge. He'd run here after taking off his armour, eager to tell Shao of the successful de-infestation of the Bathsheba and the handful of Marchonish women they'd saved. Chertang turned to look at him curiously. Shit. The space weapon. The dealer imprisoned in Jace's cabin. The second part of the plan. "Hey," Shao greeted him. She looked tired and anxious. Her efforts to keep Chertang distracted for the last several hours were telling on her. Bryce gaped as he desperately tried to think of something to say. "Our visitors left," was all he could come up with. "Our visitors?" "From Marchon." "Oh." Shao's eyes widened. "Oh, those visitors. That's fantastic news." "A few of them are staying, though." "They are?
I'll explain later.
He faced Chertang.
How's the installation going?
It's complete. We're ready to move on to testing, but I still can't locate my boss. Did you find him? He needs to be here for the test.
The test. Excellent. Xiao, could you?
I'm on it. She moved to the pilot's console.
Has everyone from your team returned to your ship?
Bryce asked Chertang.
Definitely. It's far too dangerous for them to be out in the black when we fire the weapon. But my boss has to be here. Where the hell has he got to?
Bryce shrugged.
Who knows? It's a big ship. He could be anywhere.
He commed Jackson.
Phase 2.
Copy. The comm went dead. Chertang's brow wrinkled.
Look, I know something's going on. What I can't figure out is, what? What are you guys up to?
Without turning around, Xiao replied, It's better you don't know. You seem like a nice person. I don't want to get you into trouble. Into her mic she said, Strap in, everyone. We're going for a ride.
I'm probably already in trouble,
said Chertang sadly as he fastened his safety harness.
Why's that?
Bryce slipped into the nearest seat.
Because whatever it is you have planned, I'm sure my boss isn't going to like it. And when he realizes I've been here all this time while you did your thing, he's gonna blame me for not stopping you.
How could you stop us? Asked Xiao. You don't know what we're doing. Chertang shook his head.
He isn't a reasonable man.
Then why are you working for him? The pilot was easing the Bathsheba into motion, trickling power into the engines from the large store the generators had built over the last few hours.
I don't have a choice.
Chertang scanned the bridge as if he expected the arms dealer to pop out.
He paid my school fees. It was the only way I could afford college. I agreed to work for him for 10 years once I'd graduated. I was young and stupid, and I didn't understand what I was getting into. I thought when my 10 years were up, I would be free to do my own thing. But do you think a man like that will let me leave? I know too much now. I'll be working for him for the rest of my life.
Xiao and Bryce shared a look. Hang in there, Chertang, said Xiao. Things might not turn out how you expect. She swept her screen, and the Bathsheba's thrusters burst into life, slamming Bryce into his seat. It took a couple of minutes for the inertia compensators to fully kick in. During that time, it was all he could do to avoid passing out. Chertang did pass out. His mouth hung open, and his head hung to one side. As the acceleration effects eased, his head flopped forward.
Is the space battle over?
Bryce asked Xiao. It only lasted a couple of hours, luckily for us. I would not have liked to fly into the middle of that. It was a slaughter. I don't know who won, if anyone.
How long to our destination?
Xiao consulted her screen. 21 minutes, 18 seconds.
We're that close?
We flew a lot closer when we came to the rendezvous point.
We're going to need Chertang awake. Unless he taught you how to fire the weapon.
He didn't. We're supposed to receive the instructions after we paid the dealer the remainder of what we owe. Bryce imagined the dealer, trapped, probably bounced and buffeted by the ship's movement. All comms to Jace's cabin cut. He wouldn't have heard Xiao's warning.
Someone's going to be disappointed.
Someone is already severely disappointed. Chertang began to come around. He sat upright and blinked.
Oh, yeah.
He looked worried.
Now you're awake,
said Bryce.
I want to talk to you about something. What? The weapon we're in the process of buying, we need you to fire it at something.
Chertang looked from Bryce to Xiao.
Why me?
Because we don't know how, Xiao explained.
But I could run you through. There isn't time, said Bryce. We'll only get one chance to make the shot. It has to be perfect. So, it has to be you. You're the expert, right?
Yeah, But Chertang swallowed. And in return, said Xiao, you can come with us.
Leave Lakshmi station? Leave the system on a colony ship?
Yes. He appeared to consider the offer.
I'm sorry. I can't deny it's tempting. I don't have anyone in particular I'd be sad to leave behind. My family were killed in a Quintonese attack, and my best friend from school signed up as a space marine. He didn't even last a year. But my boss is smart and ruthless. You'll never get away with fooling him. Whatever your plan is, it won't succeed. I can't take the risk. Maybe if I tell you what you'll be firing at, said Bryce, you'll change your mind. I'm listening.
After Bryce relayed the information, a smile broke out over Chertang's face.
Do it! That's a brilliant idea! I wish I'd thought of it myself. But you're right, it needs perfect targeting to do the job correctly. Great, said Bryce.
Less than 15 minutes to arrival, Xiao warned. He unsnapped his harness and leapt from his seat. Chertang was right. The arms dealer was a smart man. The easiest thing to do would be to kill him, but his workers might be more loyal than his team leader, and they were aboard a fully armed vessel. They would be deeply suspicious after not hearing from their boss for so long, and they might decide to inflict some damage on the Bathsheba to persuade the black dogs to hand him over. As Bryce waited for the elevator to take him to the top deck, the answer to his problem came. Xiao calmed him. 9 minutes.
I'm nearly there. I figured out what to do with the dealer. Chertang is still on board with the plan.
He's raring to go. The elevator stopped and the doors opened. As soon as Bryce had opened the door to Jace's bedroom, the dealer flew at him, red-faced, bruised and furious. Bryce shot low to avoid killing the man. He needed him alive. The dealer screamed and collapsed, all his anger and energy gone in an instant. He rolled on the deck, clasping his right calf and yelling in agony. Bryce cursed. He hadn't meant to hurt him so badly. But when he looked more closely, the damage didn't seem so serious. The pulse round had grazed him, burning his pants and skin, but not deeply wounded him. He threw the Eva suit at the dealer.
Stop yelling and put that on, or next time I'll aim higher. You'll regret this,
the dealer seethed. But he did as Bryce instructed, fumbling the zippers and clasps.
Hurry up,
Bryce urged, poking him with his rifle. In a few minutes, Chertang would fire the weapon. Then they would only have a short time to get out of range of the dealer's ship. The man put on his helmet. Bryce pushed the muzzle of his rifle into his back and forced him out of the cabin. The nearest airlock would do, he calculated. Once the dealer was outside, his men would be forced to decouple from the Bathsheba and pick him up, buying them precious moments. He checked the time. 53 seconds remained until they reached their target. The ship would be decelerating quickly now. The dealer was saying something and gesticulating as Bryce marched him along. He hadn't turned on his external comm, so Bryce had no idea what he was saying.
I'll kill you for this.
He had found the external comm.
I'll have you tortured until you beg for death.
They were at the airlock. Bryce opened the hatch and gave the man a hard shove, sending him through the opening and down, sprawling onto the deck. He closed the inner hatch and immediately opened the outer one. It was against protocol, but it achieved the desired effect. The fast-escaping air expelled the dealer far away from the ship. 5, said Xiao over the ship-wide comm. 3, 2, 1. There was no need for any explanation. Everyone aboard knew what she was counting down to, with the exception of the rescued Marchonish women. "We did it!" Xiao announced. "We hit it perfectly!" No one was with him to celebrate, but Bryce didn't care. There would be time to celebrate later. What mattered was the rogue planet, the excuse for decades of war, immeasurable pain and suffering, and the loss of countless lives, and the source of the ill-gotten wealth of Lakshmi Station's elite had received a hit from a weapon so powerful it would break it apart, leaving nothing but scattered rocks and a dusty haze. It was over. There was nothing left for Marchon, Quinton and Gugong to fight over. Their governments and corporations might scramble to find another excuse, but if the Marchonish would-be colonists were anything to go by, the populations were ripe for change. Hopefully they had provided the catalyst. He returned to the bridge. Van Hasty was here and so was Jackson.
"Did you check on the kids?"
Bryce asked him. "They're doing fine, and they were very glad to hear the Marchonish men are gone." Chertang was looking pleased with himself.
"What's happening with our business partner?"
Bryce asked Xiao. "You mean our soon-to-be ex-business partner?" She looked up from her scanner. His friends spotted him and are manoeuvring to pick him up.
"Then it's time we left."
"That's exactly what I was thinking." Van Hasty gasped. "Oh shit! What happened to the engineer? She's still here somewhere. Where exactly is anyone's guess?" "She'll turn up sooner or later," said Xiao, returning to the pilot's seat. Before she could issue the command to fasten safety harnesses, however, she received a comm. As she listened, her shoulders slumped. She gave a little, "Oh!" To Bryce's surprise, she collapsed onto her console and her shoulders began to shake.
"Xiao?"
He got up. At the same time, Van Hasty noticed her. She reached the pilot first and leaned over her. "What's wrong?" But Xiao couldn't answer. She was sobbing her heart out. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs. Her face a mask of bewilderment. Van Hasty removed Xiao's comm button and spoke into it. Bryce was close enough to hear Dr. Asher answer. The doctor's words were crisp and formal, but her tremulous tone conveyed her struggle to maintain her composure as she said, "I'm sorry to inform you that Jace died a few minutes ago." Chapter 45. Bryce sat with his head bowed at Karina's bedside. He'd told her that her plan had succeeded. Everything she'd set out had worked, he'd said, with a few wrinkles along the way, though they hadn't managed to find a cure for Nala. Still, she was healthy and she seemed fairly happy. The last part was a white lie. Nala appeared down, in fact, and so was Darius. But Karina didn't need to know that. Should he tell her about Jace? Bryce doubted she could hear anything anyway. She was clearly near death herself. He recalled collecting Darius from her bed. The boy had looked so sad, even asleep. No one had told him Karina would pass away soon. But he knew. Of course he knew. Bryce wondered how he could even begin to offer the boy comfort when he was broken too. He remembered the night he'd met Karina in the tavern on Ithia. He'd watched her from a distance getting drunker and drunker, drowning a nameless sorrow like so many in that place. He'd followed her out into the street, drawn to her for some unknown reason. He recalled how he'd tried to steal from her to fund the meds he needed to keep himself alive, and how she'd woken and nearly killed him. The memories came flooding back. The journey over the snowy mountains to the Shura fortress, persuading her to trust him on the Shura ship Nightfall when they'd helped her family escape. Her treacherous snake of a brother, Castiel. Sable Dirksen, malevolent and callous. Karina trapped in the battered mech on Ostalon. Both of them riding horses when they'd left the matching. Sitting with her inside the eye of the space-travelling, sentient creature Darius had incongruously named Poppy. They had lived so much in such a short space of time, and now Karina's time was coming to an end. What hurt him most was that he'd never had the chance to tell her how much he loved her. He'd gone to Lakshmi hoping he would be able to talk to her when he returned, but it was too late. She had gone downhill so fast. After explaining the plan to Van Hasty, she had never spoken again. Dr. Asher arrived. Her eyes were deeply shadowed and her face thin and pale. She had suffered through the mage's illnesses too. Bryce couldn't imagine how hard it must be to lack the ability to help your patients, to be forced to watch young, healthy people wither away while you, the medical professional, stood by, helpless. "I think you should call Darius and Nala in here," she said. A tight band fastened around his heart and chest. He swallowed and asked, "To say goodbye?" Asher nodded. "It's advised. It will help them make sense of what's happening, and eventually it will help them to come to terms with it." Hardly able to get the words out, he said, "So she doesn't have long?" "A few hours at most."
"And Parthenia?"
"She and the twins haven't entered the dying process yet, but they probably only have days left. Maybe a week or two." His world was closing in around him, but somehow he had to find the strength to struggle through.
"I'll go and get them."
He forced himself to his feet and out of the sick bay. In a waking nightmare, he walked to the children's suite. The door opened on familiar furniture. There was the table the family used to eat at together, and where Fern and Oriana would create their unorthodox fashion designs. Across the living space was the door to Parthenia's room, where she would hide away, refusing to speak to anyone. That was the sofa Darius and Nala would sit on when they played cards. Where were they? He hadn't checked up on them since hearing the news of Jace's death and hurrying to Karina's side, fearing he might never see her alive again. Did the children even know about Jace? Heavy with guilt, he crossed the living area to their bedroom. Opening the door, he stuck his head around it. Phew, they were both here. Nala was sitting on her bed reading her interface, and Darius was asleep on top of his bed covers. Nala looked up. "Hi, Bryce. Something wonderful has happened."
"Has it? Tell me about it. I need to hear something wonderful."
"I can read what I wrote before."
"You can read what you wrote? What do you mean?"
"After I had my accident," she explained patiently, "I had to learn to read again. But it was hard and I was very slow. I used to ask Darius to read for me. One day I found something I'd written months ago, a translation of the Mage documents. I couldn't understand it at all, but I tried to read it again just now, and I can. Listen." She began to read aloud, fluently and confidently, and her pronunciation of difficult words was correct. Bryce sank onto her bed. As he watched her, the truth dawned. The intelligent spark had returned to her eyes. He reached out to touch the interface, pushing it down. She looked up, confused. "Did I read it wrong?"
"No, you read it perfectly. Could you do something for me? Could you walk to Darius's bed and back?"
She strode the 10 steps, swinging her arms. Her limp had gone. The old Nala was back.
"This is a miracle. You're the same as you were before. I wonder how it happened. What have you done since we returned from Lakshmi?"
"Nothing much, just the usual. Except I had to play by myself because Darius wouldn't play with me. All he would do was lie on his bed and mope. How are Karina and the others? Are they getting better? It's boring staying in here with only Darius to talk to."
Bryce regarded the sleeping boy, and his elation over Nala's miraculous recovery turned to despair
as he remembered the awful news he had to convey. Darius was lying on his back, his elixir bottle in his hand. The cap was off, and from its position the bottle was empty. He must have drunk all the contents. That was strange. Why would he need to do a lot of casting? Horror bled into the edges of Bryce's mind. He looked at the sleeping boy more closely. For someone in a deep sleep, his chest was barely moving. Was it even moving at all? Bryce thumbed his comm button.
"Dr. Asher, please come to the children's suite immediately."
He ran to Darius's side and listened to his chest. After 2 seconds of agonized waiting, he heard one beat of the boy's heart. Darius had saved Karina's life once, bringing her back from the edge of death. It was something only spirit mages could do, Karina had told him, but it was at the risk of losing their own lives. Had Darius healed Nala's brain, reinvigorating the dead cells, returning her to her original, highly intelligent state? And had he thereby put his own life in the balance? Just when Bryce thought his world could not become any darker, a new darkness descended. If Darius died, he couldn't see a way to go on. Footsteps sounded in the outer room. Asher had arrived in record time. But it wasn't the doctor who walked into the room, it was Xiao. Her grief over Jace's death still marked her features, but she managed a wan smile. "I've left Bibic in control of the ship. I thought I would offer Darius some more flying lessons to help cheer him up."
Bryce struggled. The words wouldn't come out.
"Stars, Bryce, what's wrong?" She sat down beside him and put an arm over his shoulders.
"I think he might have sacrificed himself for Nala."
"What do you mean, sacrificed himself for me?"
asked Nala, looking up sharply. He couldn't hide it from her. She was too smart. She would figure it out anyway. "You know Darius is a spirit mage, and the rest of your brothers and sisters are star mages?"
"Yes, of course. They don't talk about it much, but I do know that."
"Well, do you remember that time we went to the matching, and Sable Dirksen had the place set alight?"
"It isn't likely I would forget something like that, is it?" "Hold on," said Xiao. "What did you say about spirit mages and star mages? What's the difference?" "Spirit mages are far more powerful," Nala answered. Then her expression grew troubled. "Did Darius cast for me? That's why I'm better?" She leapt up. "Is he going to be all right?" Asher ran in. "What's the—" "Stars, no!" She bent over Darius and lifted his eyelids. "He's out cold." She pulled a handheld scanner from a bag and placed it against his chest before running it over the rest of his body. As she read the display, a little of her tension visibly eased. "He has a steady heartbeat and respirations, but they're worryingly slow. Let's get him to sickbay. You can tell me what happened on the way." Bryce lifted the boy into his arms. Xiao grabbed Nala. "Why are star mages called that? Is it something to do with the stars?" "They aren't really sure, but it's believed they might derive their power from stars, while spirit mages derive theirs from the energy of the people around them." "It was the star! The star at Lakshmi Station is abnormal," Xiao continued. "It doesn't fit any of the categories. It sends out all kinds of weird stuff. The star must have been affecting the star mages like a poison. First it killed their ability to cast, then it got to work on the rest of their bodies. Oh no! If I'd realised earlier, I could have saved Jace." She collapsed onto the bed, but Bryce could do nothing to help her. He had to get Darius to sickbay. Chapter 46. They committed Jace's body to the universe the mage way, placing wood, water, iron and earth with it. Unable to supply a real fire, they would cremate him in a blast from the Bathsheba's thrusters, in the same way Karina had burned Mar's body all those months, years ago. She clung to Bryce's arm as the ceremony took place for physical as well as emotional support. By the time the short speeches were over, she was at the end of her strength. Waking up had seemed like a miracle. After that last boost to her metabolism by the stimulant, her descent into her illness had been rapid. She could vaguely remember closing her eyes for what she thought would be the last time. When she'd opened them again, it had been 3 weeks later. Jace had passed away. Nala was better, and the black dogs had successfully carried out her plan, ridding the ship of the Marchonish would-be invaders, and probably also put an end to the 3-system war. What was more, the Bathsheba was now fitted with a weapon so large and powerful it should deter the most intrepid space pirates. She wondered what Bongo had made of the news the rogue planet had been destroyed. Had he guessed she had something to do with it? Bryce had said his cousin had been there when they'd negotiated with the arms dealer. He had to know he'd been indirectly responsible for the destruction of the planet. She hoped the knowledge brought him some satisfaction. She was certainly happy about it, and she was grateful to Parthenia for her input. Her sister had changed her mind about other people's problems being none of her business. They had gained 7 new passengers while she'd been unconscious, 8 if you counted the baby who was due to be born soon. But they had lost one very important, very loved man who Karina would never forget. She would miss his calm, gentle presence and wise advice. The airlock opened. 6 mercs carried Jace's wrapped body through the hatch carefully and respectfully. They gently placed him on the deck, saluted, turned, and marched out. It wasn't quite the usual mage funeral, but Karina guessed Jace would have approved anyway. He and the black dogs had grown friendly over their time together, despite their opposing philosophies on life. But then again, Jace could make a friend of anyone, and who could have known him and not loved and respected him? The hatch closed. She closed her eyes and slumped against Bryce's side. "Hey, come on, let's find you a seat. I said you didn't need to stand. Everyone would have understood." "I know, but I wanted to." She allowed him to lead her to the nearest room, where they found somewhere to sit down. "I wanted to stay. I should have stayed to the end." "You're only missing the final part. It doesn't matter. Jace has gone. It's just his shell we were saying goodbye to." "I know," she whispered, hunching over as tears spilled from her eyes. Bryce pulled her close. "I don't know what to say to make you feel better. I'm going to miss him too, so much. But at the same time, I'm glad there aren't 5 more bodies in the airlock." "I'm glad the rest of us survived too. I really am, though it might not look like it. Especially Darius. He came so close." "You all came so close. Asher told me you only had a few hours left, and I had to go and get Darius and Nala to..." He took a deep breath, paused, and pressed a finger and thumb to his eyes. When he'd mastered himself, he went on, "Things could have turned out a whole lot worse. If we hadn't happened to leave the vicinity of that star in time, you wouldn't be here now." "If only we'd left earlier. If only I'd figured out the star was having an influence on us. Xiao told me there was something weird about it when we arrived. I didn't pay any attention. I was still angry at her over what she said about Darius at the meeting. I didn't think about the star at all after that. I still don't know how it affected us, but Xiao must have been right." "Right or wrong, I don't care. You're on the mend, thank the stars, though not the one powering Lakshmi station." Oriana peeked into the room. "There you are. We were wondering where you'd gone. I needed to rest a little, that's all. You'll feel better soon. Fern and I are nearly back to normal. Our bodies resisted the effects of the star longest. That was why Jace was the first to... Her face twisted and she hung her head. It's okay, Karina said. Parthenia also appeared and sat down next to Karina, resting her head on her shoulder. I can't even remember the last time I spoke to Jace, and now he's gone. I'll never get another chance to talk to him. Let's not ever fight again, okay? She appeared to be holding herself together, but the death of their friend had to be hitting her particularly hard. Jace had helped her and Darius when they were lost in the forest on Ostalon. He and Parthenia had always been close. In some ways he'd been the father she'd needed but never had. Though who her true father was, Karina remained unsure. I'll never fight with you again, I promise. You're right. You never know when it might be the last time you see someone you love. I'm going to hold you two to that, said Bryce. Oriana lifted her head and wiped away her tears. Is there any news on Darius? He should be out of sickbay next week, Karina replied. Dr. Asher said he's making good progress. She also said he should never attempt to do the same thing again, so it's up to us to keep an eye on him. I'm certainly never taking my eyes off any of you. That could get old fast, said Karina. You're just going to have to put up with me. Have you met any of the new people yet? Parthenia asked. Maybe in a few days when I'm feeling better, Karina replied. I noticed Jackson has a new arm. Oriana said, You should get him to show you what it does. Arm things? More than that, but I won't spoil the surprise. Nala wandered in reading an interface. Hey everyone, I looked something up and I thought you would be interested to know. Seeing her little sister had returned to normal had been one of Karina's greatest joys on waking, until she found out the reason why. But it was good she was better. Okay, spill the beans. Lakshmi is the name of an ancient goddess who bestowed wealth and prosperity on her worshippers.
No kidding, said Bryce. That makes a lot of sense.
Are you talking about Lakshmi Station? Asked Fern, also appearing at the door. Oriana groaned. I'm so glad we're leaving that place behind. I won't have to listen to you mispronounce the name all the time. We never even got to go there, Fern complained. You didn't miss much, believe me, said Karina. I'm very, very happy to be leaving it, and I guess now we have our ability to cast back and we're mages again, we should continue with our plan to go to Earth.
I think that decision requires a meeting, said Bryce.
Yes, said Parthenia. And don't leave me out this time. Karina hugged her. Don't worry, you're invited. The ship suddenly dipped. The 3 children who were standing stumbled, and Parthenia clutched her in surprise. What was that? Fern asked from the deck. Is Bibic at the controls? The Bathsheba swerved upward and then jerked right. What's going on? Oriana complained. Xiao's voice came over the ship-wide comm. Strap in, everyone, quick as you can. A strong gravitational field is pulling at us. The computer can't identify the source. Stars, said Karina. Can't we have a smooth, trouble-free passage for once? Is that too much to ask? The end. This has been Fatal Star, Mage Saga Book 7, written and narrated by J.J. Green. The next book in the Mage Saga series is Galactic Rift, Mage Saga Book 8. For more J.J. Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.